St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and Dominica. Another pillar crumble, down comes the prison wall. Another leader tumble, and another tyrant will fall. Coming up, a brand new revolution. Coming through the West Indies. Coming up, a brand new revolution. Colonialism dying by degrees. MC communism putting on the squeeze. Them people shouting socialism if you please. Them people shouting socialism if you please. In this music, there's a message. Disadvantage shall soon be salvaged. Listen to the new song, spreading all around. What was lost is now found. The oppressor shall be free from. Come now, a brand new revolution. Coming through the West Indies. Come now, a brand new revolution. Racialism dying by degrees. Basic communism putting on the squeeze. There's people shouting socialism if you please. There's people shouting socialism if you please.
Tendai Mwali, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Muzimu Mukulu, give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodiye, African power and African liberation for all African people. Brothers and sisters, this is going to be a powerful conversation. We are here with Daya. And so we want to encourage you first and foremost to like up the video as you come through and share it far and wide. Let the masses know that Brother ShakaRa is live on Got Kush TV in our regular ZIVANAYI. Let us get to know each other slot with a special conversation happening in and around the subject of the Grenada Revolution and its legacy and its relevance for us as African people today, family. And I have one of the most powerful panels ever assembled in the history of African people in relation to this particular subject right about now. And I say that with absolutely no exaggeration, but we have to delve into the significance and relevance of this period of our history, which wasn't so long ago. We are in the process of observing and commemorating the 40th anniversary since the execution of our great ancestor Baba Maurice Bishop, and a number of other brothers and sisters who were a part of the revolution family, who we will name very shortly, as well as the 40th anniversary of the American invasion of Grenada, which really signaled, the fall of that particular revolutionary process. And so today, what we want to do is engage in some lessons in terms of the successes and the challenges of the revolution, and how that revolution is informing the dynamics of our development as African people, particularly in the Caribbean today. And so I have a number of guests. Some of them are yet to join me and us, but I'm sure they will be soon. But at the moment, we have Grenada in the house, Guyana is in the house, and Jamaica is in the house. We are waiting on Trinidad and Barbados. I will leave you to decide whether the lateness has anything to do with the island where them come from. You know, we have to insert some, island politics into them conversation. Yeah, and the circle kings and queens. But yeah, just so you know, Trinidad and Barbados late. As it goes today, kings and queens. All right, but stay tuned. I'm going to bring forward our guests one by one. First and foremost, let's start with Guyana itself, kings and queens. An auntie who was in the midst of the revolution, and she refers to herself as an educator, and we have the pleasure of her joining us from Grenada itself right about now. She lives in Canada, but when she heard we were doing this show, she flew directly to Grenada just so she can be in Grenada for this show. All right, kings and queens. So we want to introduce you to Auntie Valerie. Auntie Valerie Gordon, greetings.
Greetings from Grenada. Warm and
Indeed.
beautiful.
Indeed. Well, if your smile is anything to go by, it's definitely warm over there. You know what I mean? Definitely warm over there. All right. And secondarily, brothers and sisters, Grenada by way of the UK. Let me introduce you to Brother Kwabena Denot Nyak. Greetings, brother.
Greetings. A powerful panel. Why am I included? Especially against someone as erudite as Comrade Sister Valerie Gordon Williams.
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed. So am I, my brother, but you're included because you're just about as good looking as I am. So that's the reason why you're here. All right. So
good favors for you.
All right. And my brothers and sisters, so I wanted to include, and this is, we have eldership, and we have, juniorship, so to speak, all right? And so I wanted to include a Pan-Africanist, from the Caribbean, who is a part of my generation on this subject as well, to give that special perspective and look at the continuity of this legacy. And this brother is an erudite Pan-Africanist organizer and researcher, and also a prolific writer, kings and queens. And so he goes by the name of Brother Dwayne Omowale. Greetings, my brother.
Greetings. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, indeed. And from Guyana, but you're in the US of A at the moment, correct?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So, Guyana is in the building. And me, as an African, my family come from Jamaica and Antigua. And so, we just have the Jamaica vibration, Panya. But Jamaica vibe by way of the UK. Let me introduce you all. No stranger to Got Kush TV, Elder Cecil Gutsmore. Greetings, Elder Cecil.
I'm here, my brothers and sister. I hope you can hear me and see me. I'm seeing you.
Yes, we can. We
right.
can. So, and more importantly, we can see all your books behind you. So, I'm getting
worried. I'm getting worried about the state of my study.
Oh well, anytime you want to upload some book, just feel free to contact me. I'm ready. All right. Yes, indeed. All right. Okay, so we're waiting on representatives from Barbados and Trinidad. Yeah, so do stay tuned. I won't bother to introduce them now, but do stay tuned because Trinidad and Barbados is due to join us in this conversation. Also, I want to thank you all for being here. Yes, and so dutifully, I'm going to start because our auntie may have to leave a little bit early. So let me start with Sister Valerie, and I'll come to the rest of you, all my elders and my brother. Shortly. Auntie Valerie, please, just let's start with your own personal experience. You were in the center, in the heat of the battle, so to speak. What was you doing in Grenada during 1979 to 1983?
Actually, I was at teachers training college, finishing my certificate in teacher training.
Right.
From 77. So it was my final semester almost. Just married, 8 months pregnant.
Oh, wow. Indeed.
And so I was married at the time to Leon Cornwall, who was one of the 16 people who went to the barracks to overthrow the Gary regime, and as a member of the Central Committee. So very much in the midst of all of this. Did not know any. The only time I'd heard about revolution before is in the history books, maybe in the American Revolution or in Haiti. And so I was just finishing my teacher training program, essentially, when this took place. However, immediately I was recruited to become involved in the National Youth Organization and the National Women's Organization, eventually becoming members of the executive of both. And then in September, I was asked to head the National Literacy Program as the coordinator. So in the middle of everything.
Right. Beautiful, beautiful. And that's important to know. So last week, brothers and sisters, we introduced you to the national organizations, and institutions that the revolution developed in order to gauge, amass, and collate the voices of the people so that they can contribute to the development of the nation. Auntie Valerie, give us a first-hand experience, of the work that the National Youth Organization was doing and the National Women's Organization was doing, please.
So with the National Youth Organization was mainly organizing young people into groups to participate, whether that was in community development, self-help projects, cleaning up your community every week, or just mobilizing your community to be involved, participating at the village councils or the parish councils, attending the mass rallies that took place, volunteering to teach in the CPE program, a range of activities like that. A lot of young people were. The youngest volunteer was about 12 years old in high school in Carriacou. And then also the women, similarly for the women, organizing women into the National Women's Organization. But I must say that there was some level of organization underground before the actual revolution. So there were women vendors, for example, engaged in selling the New Jewel Movement newspapers secretly with their wares. That I didn't know about at the time.
Right.
So there was some leadership that emerged right after the revolution as far as building the women's movement is concerned.
Right. Beautiful. And we could do a whole show on the period before the revolution, because I'm very interested in the levels of organization that took place, and I'm sure Brother Kwabena is going to give us some insight into that, because he have the knowledge with that concern, because we done talk to him already. All right. But you know what I'm saying, but there's a lot of organizing that took place for them to be able to even be in a position to overturn the Gary regime. Now on the issue of women in particular, there's a speech that Maurice Bishop delivered, the famous speech at Hunter College, where he says that the first decree of the revolution was to ban sexual exploitation of women, particularly in the workplace. And when you look at the revolutionary process and footage and any kind of documentary on the revolution, what is extremely apparent is the extent to which women were very prominent, in the leadership, particularly in terms of the many different institutions, not just the women's organization, but in the education, the nutrition council, etc., etc. Could you speak to the impact that the revolution had on the role and understanding of women in the society?
Well, it could be summed up in one word: the liberation of women, and in the programs that supported that liberation. So, for example, the milk feeding program that allowed women to be able to feed their children, their babies in particular, the maternity leave law that allowed women who are having babies to have 3 months paid leave from work, equal pay for equal work. You had a lot of estate workers who were receiving less pay per task than the men were. And even in teaching, because many women were engaged in the teaching profession, you had the training of teachers. And so there already you have about 4 or 5 different areas that women were in. And then, of course, in the community engagements, in the community cleanups at the village and parish councils, women were directly involved in all of these.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And then similarly, when it comes to the young people, because obviously one of the things that we also learn is that within months of the revolution, over 100 students were sent abroad and given free scholarships to go learn and them kind of things there. And there's a documentary that we watched last week where we saw a young person saying, well, yeah, one of the major issues that was facing young people under Gary was a significant level of unemployment. Apparently over 30% of the young people were unemployed. Over nearly 50% of the entire population, yes, was unemployed. And significantly, the support for the revolution came fundamentally from the younger generation. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. The students, for example.
Right. In particular. Okay. So what was it about the students at that particular moment in time? Yeah. What was it? Just responding to the circumstances of the time and the conditions of Grenada, or was everybody reading Marx and Lenin? And had an astute, socialist analysis, of the dynamics of Grenada at that time, and decided to wage a Leninist revolution at this moment. Was that what happened? Is that
we wish it were the latter, We wish in our dreams. But if you recall, in 1973-74, you had the nurses' struggle, where the nurses were demonstrating for better conditions of work. And the students were massively involved in that. And you know, young people, students tend to catch on to these issues and be very idealistic in some of the things that they wish for, wanted. And Gary, in particular, seemed to have an issue with that because his autocratic style of leadership did not fit well with students. So if you knew about all of the demonstrations that were happening during that period of time, students were a large part of that, the National Students' Councils and so. Then, of course, in the year before the revolution, I think it was just 4 scholarships that were given for tertiary education for the degree programs outside of Grenada, including the ministers. And in 1979, the revolution was able to arrange with the Cuban government for 50 scholarships. But when you look at that, and you think about how those scholarships impacted on families, on the economy across the board, because they're the ones who are practicing medicine. Every year after that, you had a substantial number of persons going out to get their degrees and so. And they are coming. Their second and third generation people have advanced significantly as a result of that.
Yes. Give thanks. My elder brothers, please just bear with me. We're gonna just soak in the wisdom of Auntie Valerie for a hot minute. Like I said, we actually have to go in, so do stay tuned. I hope you don't feel left out on the conversation. But you know, we want to hear from the woman them. You know what I mean? We want to hear from the aunties them. All right. And with that said, Trinidad is in the place. All right, Trinidad is in the place. I want to welcome from the National Joint Action Committee, Brother Apoku. And well, I've added him, but he seems to have frozen. So, but yeah, for those who are aware, NJAC, the organization was a serious and remains a serious Pan-African organization, Black Power organization coming out of Trinidad. Very, very important in terms of the dynamics of the 1970s in Trinidad. And some say that the NJAC was actually an inspiration for a lot of those who were at the helm of the Grenada Revolution prior to the revolution as well. And so we're going to get that perspective from our brother Apoku, yes, who I should say, sorry, let me say, Brother Apoku is actually from Tobago. Yeah, we know getting involved in Trinidad and Tobago politics. Yeah, so let me get it right. Yeah. So Trinidad and Tobago is being represented by a brother from Tobago. Yes, so he was the head of NJAC Tobago. Okay, so he'll be back with us in a second. His line has just dropped off. All right. So I'm going to ask you one more question, Auntie Valley. We're going to go to the rest of our brothers, and then we're going to come back to you. When it comes to we spoke about zonal councils, yes, and worker parish councils and all these things, and we went into how that was the institutions that were through which the revolution was developing a quote unquote new democracy, a participatory democracy style. We went into also the amount of work, yes, that it must have taken to establish and sustain, yes, all of that infrastructure. Yeah, are you able to speak to the extent to which all of those institutions worked and did not work, the challenges and the virtues of engaging in all of that discussion, all of that negotiation, all that debate at every moment to try and get things done? Or was it actually not as difficult as it might sound?
It was difficult. If you imagine the leaders of the youth movement and the women's movement, myself included among all the others and the executives and so, were moving around. You had your full-time job in the day, and then on evenings, you would be moving around the island. I remember there were no cell phones in those days. There were few cars available, moving around the island to help engage in these activities. I remember, for example, when the national budget was being prepared, that was a big issue, a big time for parish and zonal councils, where a draft would be presented and they would respond and indicate what they think should be in the budget. So it was a two-day process where the people were getting educated about the national budget, and they were able to input into what the priorities for the budget should be. A tremendous amount of work. And on the other side, one of the things that does not often come out about the challenges of the revolution is the extent to which the leadership were stretched and possibly burned out towards the period of October 1983. Remember, these were young people out of school literally in early 20s, in the military, in the zonal councils, organizing, doing all of that work, bent on delivering the promises of the revolution and trying to do it overnight, literally, because you know youth exuberance.
100%.
You have the energy and the strength. You have families that you sometimes were not able to pay attention to the way that we are doing now. And I think of my own situation. I mean, Leon was out very often. He was involved in the army, in the militia, in the youth work. I myself as a young mother, way out in the country, 11 and 12 o'clock in the night. I remember my mother being at my house sometimes and quarreling with me about the fact that when I had my second daughter, as soon as she was 2.5, 3 months, I would put her in a basket and take her into the office because we had the CPE books to finish writing and send to Cuba for printing. People often, except among those who are engaged in that way and very driven and excited and happy doing it, not recognizing that these things take a toll on you over time. And that's the big factor in the quality of decision making and so that took place towards the October 1983.
100%. Yes, the first person that brought that home to me, in fact, was actually Elder Cecil Gutsmore, because he had visited them during I believe it was 1983. Elder Cecil?
No, 1980, the first anniversary.
1980, right? And
the leadership already looked tired.
Looked tired. Yes,
at the time.
Yeah,
because it was just, for all of what you've said, exhausting, and they had been before the revolution through a terrible time resisting Geary. So it does matter that the level and quality of organization in the circumstances that our sister had described was difficult and wearing and exhausting, undoubtedly.
yes.
And we haven't yet inserted into that equation the anti-imperialist struggle and the threat of the invasion and removal of the revolution. The internationalist work and duties that people had in terms of the demands on it, the example. Now, we had a lot of people from other islands come and work, bring their expertise. But remember that all of that was happening under the threat of an invasion.
100%. We are going to definitely come back to that particular point. It's impossible to tell the story of this revolution without that aspect, and we're going to make sure that you get to speak to that, Auntie Valerie, before you go. Okay, so don't worry about that. All right.
Could I just make one additional point about the students in 1980 when I was there, actually as a guest of the revolution. One of the striking things within the youth presence was Rastafari, even within the army. So that was a specific feature of Grenada, that it wasn't just young students, it was young people who were committed and visibly committed, with locks and all, to Rastafari, and they had been allowed to keep their locks in the army. So locksman did fill up the army.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and it's important that we register that as a fact of the situation. So Rastafari ideology and Pan-Africanist ideology was a key feature of the Grenada Revolution.
Let me just make a very quick addition as you asked about the youth. Remember, we were in the, I see you have your red, black, and green. We were in the era of the Black Power movement. And so the militance of young people was also impacted by that whole movement at the time. In fact, it's one of the things that was the thorns that was in Gary's side all the time. So the militancy of the youth was also impacted by the international movement, Black Power movement.
100%. And we did touch on the Rastafari element last week in terms of the involvement, particularly in the People's Revolutionary Army of Rastafari leading up to the revolution. There were also some challenges there. Yeah, apparently some Rastafari original system became a little bit disillusioned with the thing. So we're going to touch on that a little bit later on and look at the dynamics of that, because I think there are arguments on both sides of that equation. Yeah, and I'm learning more about that at the moment myself. In fact, I've got a brother who I'll share the name of the book in a second, but one of the brothers who was actually in the army has written a book on his experience. He's not a fan of at all. So we're going to give that experience, that perspective and look at it, all right? None of our ancestors were perfect, but we don't have to dash out everything, you know what I'm saying? So we're going to, challenge and look at the dynamics, all right? Brother Kwabena, I'm going to come to you next, for some exploration here, because we want to get an understanding of how they were able to do this in the first place anyway. Yes. And that you were, just explain what your role was first and foremost in relation to the revolution.
Okay. Firstly, you have someone in Valerie who was there. And so I'm saying things to you secondhand because I was here during all of these momentous times.
100%.
You also have brother comrade Cecil, who went to Grenada many times, much more than me, and has a more mature understanding of what was unfolding. Some 100%. Of what I'm going to say I've subsequently matured into. Well, firstly, I left Grenada and arrived in England in 1960.
Right.
My parents had come and they had brought me up later. And as I went to school and so on, I had no intention of going back to Grenada. I was living in England, and this is where I was going to stay. I went for a holiday in 1972, I think, and I had a great holiday. Whilst I was at the beach somewhere, a comrade from Jewel came and wanted to speak to me, but I wasn't there. Didn't follow it up. Not interested. Came back to England. And it wasn't on the road to Damascus, maybe on the road to Ladbroke Grove, but I suddenly said, this country, the people are damn poor. What would it be like if it was me? Would there be someone like me coming from England and just washing their hands? So I joined with Dennis Augustine, who was a lawyer at the time and became subsequently the first ambassador of the People's Revolutionary Government to the United Kingdom.
Beautiful.
Participated in an organization from 1973 called Grenada Cause for Concern. And we agitated amongst Grenadian community. We raised money for Jewel because we were very close to Jewel. Printed material, we printed books, and on 2 occasions, without the permission of the NJM in Grenada, we approached and met with the ambassador for Algeria and the Cuban ambassador and urged them to support the NJM in Grenada. The net result of our visit to these embassies was that they gave us holiday books, tourist books on Cuba and tourist books on Algeria, and say, we'll be in touch with you. Thank you very much. And that was the last we heard from them until later. When the revolution occurred, and we've been doing this for many years, and when the revolution occurred, I worked in a very minor role in the High Commission. Subsequently, I was appointed as trade officer for UK Europe personally by Maurice Bishop in his house.
Okay.
Now,
beautiful.
If you really want to cover, and I think you're going to need about a month of sessions like this to cover the revolution, and even then, you will get the essence of the revolution. But some of the issues that you really need to cover, would be, many people would want to know about the events of October the 19th. I don't want to discuss that tonight because the program in itself.
100%.
People may want to know about how did the revolution evolve? How did it happen? Was it that Maurice Bishop stood up one day and Bernard Court stood up and say, hey, we're going to have a revolution, and everything coalesced into this successful revolution? No, it was much more complex.
Right.
The achievements of the revolution. Now, Comrade Sister Valerie has told you some of the achievements of the revolution. She has told you only about less than 1% of what the revolution is.
100%.
What was the threats faced by the revolution brought about by the United States? What about the invasion and the aftermath? What about the campaign that I am pushing for, which is for the return of the bodily remains of Comrade Maurice Bishop and those of his supporters who were killed with him? And then what's all this about? Why are we rabbiting on about the revolution this, the revolution that? Now, it's 40 years ago. Many people look at me and you can see in their eyes, they say, stop all this stuff. You know, you're a big man, do something else. And why are we doing it? And so those are some of the things that I think can be discussed. Now, I don't know where you would like me to begin. Let's
begin here, my brother, because you are very passionate about people understanding the agency, of the people of Grenada and the leadership of the New Jew movement in making this revolution happen, and developing the nation. So I want to begin with the agency in terms of the planning that it took to even make the revolution happen. If that makes sense, just give our listeners and our viewers an idea of you're telling me, you asked me how did they manage to get the artillery, the weapons, and them kind of things there. Let brothers and sisters know, Brother Kwabena, how was this all organized, and what went on?
Well, as I said, and I'm so frightened because I can see Sister Valerie, and she's going to pin me down. You got that wrong. You got this wrong, and so on. Now, our people are a mixture, a majority of Africans and a minority of Indians and others. As you know, our people were captured, kidnapped in Africa, trafficked across the Atlantic, and made into hewers of wood and carriers of water. We were worked to death on what Sister Valerie referred to as the estates. Some people have romantically called them plantations. They were work camps. You had to work. You can't, it wasn't gone with the wind and all of that stuff. And during that period, we were made docile. We were denied education. We were denied learning. Some would have learning. Some would have education. And this nevertheless resulted in us not having thoughts about ourselves. However, from day one, Grenadians resisted this situation. So I think in the 1790s, the Fedon uprising took place. We were the only country in the British Empire that captured its Governor General. And when they refused to negotiate with us, he was executed. The negotiation was over the prevention of the execution of some of their comrades. They were executed, and so Governor General was executed. That uprising was crushed. Eric Gary came along in the late 40s and early 50s, and he too was a revolutionary. Yes, during the revolution, we said, Gary is this, Gary is that, which he was, extremely vicious. But he took on the empire. He was arrested on numerous occasions, but he broke the thought process that kept Africans and Indians in subjugation. He realized we could do something. And some people have said, you know what? Without Gary, this revolution wouldn't have taken place in 1979. And maybe that's true. I think it is true, because it broke through that black people could organize, they could do things, they had the wherewithal. Now, the revolution...
Could I intervene just to add something of the brothers? He jumped from the enslavement period, Fennel, to the 1950s of Geary. But there's whole other stuff. Grenada resistance between those two periods, and if you do that jump, you miss out Grenada and Garveyism, and you miss out Marichaud. Yeah, you miss out the fact that at the beginning of the 1930s, a third of Grenada's population were out on the street with Marichaud. And so it's very important that we remember. Our brother mentioned docile. I don't think he really meant that, because there is never docility amongst the Grenada people. There's a history of continuous resistance against colonialism. What Geary did was to organize agricultural workers into trade unions, and urban workers too into trade unions. And that was Geary's strength, because in a way, Marichaud had been so effective that the trade union movement, which emerged in Trinidad and Barbados and Guyana and Jamaica in the 1930s, didn't actually emerge in quite that way in Grenada in the 30s. And that's what Geary picked up and ran with before becoming the monster that we know him to have been. And it's the monstrosity of his mongoose gangs and his election rigging and so on that were the key drivers of the resistance that non-Grenadans were interested in. Our brother mentions Fennis Augustine. I was on the editorial committee of a magazine called The Black Liberator, and we did an interview. I conducted the interview with Fennis before the revolution, and if you go back to that, you'll see a full description of the movement of resistance, including trade union resistance against Geary in the time when he was this brutal dictator. There was resistance, and the people who were the leadership of the NJM were in fact in the parliament because their resistance had. It's only because Geary was using brute force and election rigging that he remained in office, because he'd actually been out-electioneered by exactly the people who eventually became the revolutionary leadership. And it may be that they became the revolutionary leadership at the time they did, in part because had they not moved against Geary, he had plans to kill them.
And I'm very grateful to Brother Cecil. There are things that I know and things that I don't know, and there are things that you sort of have time for. Of course, Butler, who was engaged in those struggles that you mentioned, Cecil. But
he was a Grenadian in Trinidad.
Yes. Going on to the organizing, as I said earlier, Cord and Bishop didn't suddenly jump up and everything fell into place. Prior to, I think, just about 1972, two organizations in Grenada came together. MAP, Movement for the Assemblies of the People, and JEWEL, JEWEL standing for Joint Endeavor for Welfare, Education and Liberation. And Jewel and Map became the new Jewel movement. Now, they did not.
Sorry, Robert Cobbin. Let me just at this point call the name of Unison Whiteman, who was the head of Jewel at the time. Yeah, go ahead.
I think he was head of MAP. I will give to my.
I thought that was the other way around. But yeah, go ahead.
He was certainly one of the leaders
yes.
of one of the organizations. The New Jewel movement took a view that whilst they will try every reasonable means to obtain power in order to bring about change in Grenada, it wasn't going to be done just by those at the top dictating to those at the bottom, this is what we're going to do. In other words, they weren't standing on the stage of politics and there is an audience of the masses. They engaged with people in terms of putting forward ideas. They engaged at a local level. They engaged with trade unions. They engaged with students. And Comrade Sister Valerie will have told you of some of those things. And they decided at an early stage they were going to set out a plan for what would take place once they had achieved power. And this was a plan called the Manifesto. A document in which they said, in relation to this sector, we're going to do this. In relation to the empowerment of women, we're going to do that. In relation to industry, we're going to do so and so and so on. Now, they didn't then do that in a room and say, right, we've done it. Everybody, here it is. This is the manifesto. There was discussions at local level. I've been told, when I say local level, not mass meetings at a village, but even house-to-house meetings, asking people their views on what should be included in the manifesto, what should be important to people there. So in that period, there was a huge set of meetings taking place across the country. And the manifesto was endorsed in a place called Sea Moon. I think that manifesto was endorsed about 1973. I'm not quite sure. So the Grenadian people had been aroused and been told, look, this is the promise that will be given to you, and you will have these things when we get into office.
Yes.
Whilst they engaged in the parliamentary process, it was quite clear from the way that Geary acted that he wasn't going to just be a walkover and so on. It was quite clear that Geary wanted to become head of the new government following independence, which came about in 1974. It was decided by the leadership of the New Jewel movement that you're not going to get power through the democratic process that Geary espouses. Force. And so efforts were made and were successful in getting weapons for the revolution. And training was sought and was given so that you had trained comrades who could undertake military operations. Now, I'm going to ask a question here and ask people, do they know where the weapons came from? And do they know where the military training was given? Who gave the military training? We may come back to that later on. Needless to say,
feel free to answer it now, Brother Kwabena. Feel free to answer it now.
Well, I'll ask one of everyone here is probably except Dwayne. No, so Dwayne, tell us, what do you think these things happen?
Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, to be honest, I actually never thought about that aspect of the revolution. It's one of those things I knew that it happened, but it never actually occurred to me to question where the training and the weapons came from.
Right. But despite the best efforts of Fennis, Augustine, and myself to get the Cubans to support the Revo and to get the Algerians to support the Revo and maybe give us a few arms and so on, it never happened.
Right.
The weapons came from America. The weapons were purchased in America by comrades who were given a huge sum of money to purchase these weapons. The money being provided by the business classes in Grenada. The weapons were smuggled into Grenada, I suspect through having contacts in customs, and distributed across the island. And training was provided by, I don't think the Americans are not aware, was provided by the government of Guyana. We had no support from any of the Eastern European countries or any of the socialist countries across the world. This is not a criticism. I'm just stating it, despite efforts being made. And I know that the New Jewel, had been making strenuous efforts to get the support of the Cubans. I can understand the Cubans' position, which is every crazy half-assed person comes along and says, I'm leading a revolution in my country. Can you give us some support? And they must have a list so big saying, yeah. No wonder we got the holiday booklets and so on instead of the weapons. So the revolution occurred, and within hours, you could say, people were out in the street. They had an idea based upon that huge amount of work done by the revolution as to what was going to be achieved. I'll take a break here and say, do you want
no problem.
Other people to?
I'm gonna come back to Auntie Valerie because I know her time is short. Go ahead, Elsa, very quickly because I do want to make the most of Auntie Valerie's time.
I just want to make a small intervention on the arms. I agree with all of the stuff that was being said about source of arms and so on, and I know that some arms came in through Union Island, and I was concerned with where Finnish was concerned, and with that kind of stuff and so on. But it's important that we understand that the Grenada Revolution was not a particularly well armed. The people who were on the people's side were not particularly well armed. And the arms that they had by the first day of the revolution were actually the arms of the Giri state, because they got them from True Blue barracks and from the police stations and so on. So it's not so important that 100. Arms were smuggled in. It's more important that Giri's army in the barracks was asleep, literally asleep, and it's also important that they were sufficiently popular for the people to come out and for there to be next to no resistance at the point at which the state could have resisted.
Well, you know what? I'm and this is gonna direct to my question for Auntie Valerie, because so I've heard Bernard Court speak about some of this and basically their decision making around this. They said there was a 200-man military unit that was trained by Pinochet in what the place named Chile. Yeah, right. And they had Pinochet's forces had trained the army, and Pinochet's forces were funded by America. Yes. And given them weaponry and given them jets. Yeah. So this 24 man squad that became known as the Green Monster or something like that. Yeah. I don't know if that was the official name. Green Beast. Sorry. Green Beast. Yeah. Right. So the Bernard Cord, Maurice Bishop and others were deciding whether to go for them first, the actual standing army, or the military, or the police first. Yeah. And they decided to go for the Green Beasts first because they figured that if they subdued them and the rest of the military, then the police will capitulate. All right. But the point I'm making there is that the forces, as Auntie Valerie was mentioned, of Western imperialism were already in Grenada prior to the revolution. Yeah. Ensuring that Gary was maintained in power. All right. So Auntie Valerie, I know you have to leave soon, so I'm gonna ask you two questions. Just give away where you are out of them question here. All right. The first question is, what do you think the impact of the revolution was in terms of the example that it set for the rest of the Caribbean region? And can you just speak to what you alluded to earlier in terms of the role and the impact of Western imperialism on the revolutionary process itself?
So first is the one of the most powerful things about the revolution was the release of people's agency, the unleashing of ordinary people's agency, the sense that they could do, the creativity. I mean, when you think of say, what was his name? Cunha. Cunha was a farmer who could literally not read and write. And he designed a beetle trap to catch beetles, to control beetles on his farm. That is one of the classic examples of the unleashing of people's agency and the confidence that they had, that the revolution achieved. It is also maybe one of the critical considerations of US imperialism as far as the example that could have for other peoples in the region. Because remember, countries were going through their struggles, Guyana, Trinidad, there were movements of struggles and resistance in other territories as well. So that was key. The second thing was, while the Cuban Revolution was in a Spanish-speaking country, the Grenada Revolution was English and Black. English and Black. Right? So the implications for the Black liberation movement in the United States itself and in other parts of the world were tremendous. You had to crush this thing before it spread further, because people are learning that they have power. And this is coming up long after independence, long after, this was in the era of the independence movement across the region, where several territories were becoming independent of colonialism. So if you put it in that context, you could also realize. Then if you go back to Reagan's speech around that time, he was very clear in his speech about the significance of Grenada and the Grenada Revolution. One of the things, remember, we had the Cold War at the time, so the geopolitics of the Cold War. But if you think, the other point I learned from his speech was, if you think of Grenada's location at the southern, almost southernmost barren Trinidad part of the Caribbean. That narrow shipping channel between the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea and the Panama Canal, that had implications for shipping routes across that part of the island, of the region. Right? Because outside of that, you have to go south to South America and come back up into the Panama Canal. So it made that trip much shorter. So the fact that we were probably 80,000, 90,000 people, a small island, small population. We were located where we are located. We had the Cold War, and of course the Monroe Doctrine, not in my backyard. We were English speaking. So the lessons of that could easily be transferred to people.
Yes, more. And I wonder if you could talk to us also about this idea of participatory democracy. The revolution was criticized heavily for not holding elections. And the response of Bishop in particular to that was basically that we are developing a new constitution. And so the constitution is going to be the framework through which we have elections. And then our brother Set Imhotep, who's in the chat last week, said, well, it just makes sense. Why would you host an election based upon a colonial constitution that and that kind of thing? But I'd like to ask you about what you know and what you may have experienced of the process of developing that new constitution that was cut short by the ending of the revolution.
I know that there was a commitment towards developing a new constitution, but a lot of the pressures of delivering on the promise and the gains of the revolution, I think, outweighed that in terms of significance. That's a whole debate about the merit or demerits of that, and whether or not the Americans would still have invaded, even if you had put in a constitution, because we know there are other situations where constitutionality was in place and they still overthrew the government or still did what they needed to do. So it's an argument that's being used, but I'm not sure of the validity of that argument. And then again, the example of participatory democracy, that people were able to self-determine, and engage in all of these processes that enabled them to make the strides that they did at the time. The argument that this was the fact that we were building an airport. And everybody knows when you look at the airport, the length of the runway and so being for military purposes, you look at it and you realize that's a joke. And it was so important because I was using the example recently. Well, when you look at St. Vincent, our neighboring sister island, and how it took them to build an airport. Only a couple of years ago, they were able to build their own airport. And solve the issue of having always to go travel home or from St. Vincent, you have to go either via Barbados or Trinidad. So economic implications of having our own airport was critical. But I want to get to something that in my own mind emerged as a bit of a challenge. And I think we need further thought and consideration.
Please do.
The contradictions that must have arisen, or challenges, nuances, whatever you want to call it, must have arisen in terms of the governance of the country between the history and tradition of autocracy, right? Even if you had parliamentary style democracy, the power of the prime minister in our territory is supreme, and it remains if you look at other territories in the region.
Yes.
And the fact that the revolution was attempted to bring in more democratic processes, popular democracy, people's democracy. What did that mean for the challenges that the leadership, including Maurice himself, would have faced? Because all before was the experience of a supreme leader who basically dictated, and we reverted back to that afterwards. How did that work with this new model of democracy and leading that, making that work, learning from it, changing, building, developing? I think that's an area of lessons for us and for all movements in the world that are attempting these processes, to not ignore the internal challenges. And we tend to personalize them in Maurice and Bishop and Code, right? In Bernard and Maurice. Remove Bernard and Maurice and put any other two personalities.
Of course.
What's the dynamic of all that? And I think the NGM struggled with that. And they tried to keep it away from the population. They thought they could manage it and figure it out. But that would not have been easy. And it's something that we have not talked about, we have not observed, and the lessons of it, I think, would be powerful. How did the revolution manage that dynamic between the tradition of a supreme leader, a maximum leader, and the democratic processes that it sought to engage that required the actual opposite?
Yes.
In terms of the type of leadership that was required.
Yes, Mama. Thank you very much. You know, I'm going to stay as long as you can, and anytime you want to interrupt, let me know, because I'll come to you until you need to leave. Okay, I'm going to go on to somebody else, but I worked hard to get you here, so so I'm so glad that you're here, and I appreciate your presence. And stay tuned, because I'm going to call you back for come. Yeah, brother Apoku in Trinidad is having some issues staying on, so I'm going to come to him in a second, because he seems to have frozen again. I'm going to give brother Dwayne Omawale an opportunity. My brother, when you're the youngest on the panel, you just have to speak last. This is what it is. You know what I'm saying? So, you know,
I have no problem with it, because you know, for me, obviously, you know, the Grenadian Revolution is something that I've read about, and you know, I've seen videos and documentaries on, but it's different to get the perspective of people who've actually lived through it, you know, who were a part of that process. 100%. I always appreciate learning from my elders.
I know you do, my brother, and but that's the reason why you're here, yeah, because I know that you're a very studied and learned man, and we need that perspective of the younger generation, because it's us that's going to keep the flame alive. Yeah, and so it was important for me to have you here, not only because you're from Guyana, and I just love Walter Rodney, but also because of the fact that you know, your other generation, whereby you have picked up and learned, like myself, yes, and been inspired by the Grenada Revolution. And so I want to speak to you about that specifically, yeah. But before we get onto that, can you just give us a perspective from Guyana. Guyana's already been mentioned, and there's a contradiction, an obvious contradiction there, yeah, in the sense of the fact that the head of state of Guyana at the time, yeah, was the man who is accused, yes, and is most likely responsible for the assassination of Walter Rodney. Okay, so there's some obvious contradictions there, and anybody who's in the chat that understands those dynamics, who was placed in the history, would have clocked that. Yeah. So what was from your understanding, what was the impact of the Grenada Revolution on Guyana? And how do we reconcile the contradiction of who was the head of state at the time with the support that Guyana gave to Grenada?
Yeah, well, I will start by saying that, when we talk about the period of the Black Power movement in the Caribbean, that was a period of a lot of contradictions, because it was a period where you had, individuals like Gary, like Forbes Burnham in Ghana, like Eric Williams, so many of these leaders who were previously anti-colonial leaders, people who were fighting the British colonial administration, came to power, and suddenly it almost felt like these were the people who were actually keeping the same colonial system in place, so that even though Caribbean countries are now independent, it was essentially the same colonial system that was in place. And I think of the leaders of that generation, Burnham, of Ghana, definitely is a typical example of this, type of contradiction, that Burnham came to power presenting himself as, a very anti-colonial, revolutionary, socialist, Pan-African leader. And in many ways, the policies he implemented in Ghana still kept the colonial system in power. So one of the contradictions that did emerge in Ghana was that conflict within the Pan-African movement itself, that one aspect of the Pan-African movement in Ghana was Burnham and his political party, the PNC political party, that represented the older anti-colonial struggle against British imperialism. But other wing of the Pan-African movement was represented, like Walter Rodney, whom you mentioned, EUC Kwana, other Pan-African activists who worked the WPA, the Working People's.
Right.
So within Ghana, you see that conflict between Burnham and his particular brand of Pan-Africanism and colonialism, and that conflict between the people like Walter Rodney and other Pan-African activists who were essentially making the argument that even though Caribbean countries now are independent, we still have to deal with the same colonial system, and this is what Kwame Nkrumah called neo-colonialism. Basically meaning that even though countries are independent, we still have the same colonial system in place. So we see these conflicts, throughout the Caribbean, and Ghana, is one of the places where we see that conflict. So that's where Grenada becomes very interesting, because as I said before, I never really gave it a thought as to who provided the funds and the training for the revolution in Grenada, but it doesn't surprise me that it came to Ghana, because that's what Burnham was doing. Burnham was very supportive of anti-colonial struggles across the Caribbean and throughout Africa as well. Burnham's government provided a lot of support for anti-colonial struggles in Africa. So that's where we see that conflict emerging within Ghana's politics, that he's an anti-colonial figure internationally, locally, in the view of Ronnie and other activists who fight him as being a neo-colonial type of dictator, not unlike Gary. So that's where the Grenadian Revolution in Ghana becomes interesting, because on the one hand, you have Maurice Bishop's government, which is very close to Burnham and very close to Ghana.
So, sorry, Omowale, your mic seems to be going in and out. And if you can come closer to the thing or something, or you have a headset or something where you can use.
Yeah, I don't have a headset. Is it good now?
Yes, it's better now. By the way, just as I've taken that break, brothers and sisters, I should have said to you earlier that I'm gonna try and create some time for brothers and sisters to come live and interact with the panel. In leading up to that, please feel free to @GotKushTV if you want to ask a question. Yeah, so there's a lot of conversation that takes place between people in the chat, and now I'll read everything. So if you want your question or your comment to be read out, please @GotKushTV, and I'll be able to see it and read it out. All right, go ahead, Omowale. Continue. Sorry,
okay, it's good now.
It's better. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, all right. Yes. So what I was saying, so the contradiction that emerged in Ghana, where the revolution in Grenada was concerned, is that you had Burnham's government, which was very supportive of Maurice Bishop's government that came to power, but at the same time, it was also very inspirational for the activists like Walter Rodney and people in the WPA, because within the Black Power movement of that time period, Grenada was actually the only nation in the English-speaking Caribbean that had a successful revolution, where the advocates of the Black Power movement were actually able to take power. So in many ways, Grenada actually represented the vision for what so many other activists in the region were trying to accomplish. And one point that I want to mention is I noticed you started the program with Brother Valentino, who is actually originally from Grenada. His song "Brand New Revolution," and that's what Grenada represented to Ghana and to other nations throughout the Caribbean. It represented the fulfillment of that revolution that so many activists at that time were fighting for throughout the region.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so we know of Walter Rodney. Are there any? Because Walter Rodney actually traveled to Grenada during the revolution, yeah, and was actually assassinated just over a year after it took place. Were there any other Pan-African organizers, Black Power organizers in Guyana who traveled to Grenada during that time?
To my knowledge, she's the only one that I'm aware of that actually traveled to Grenada. But
I think Yan Carew was Guyanese, and he played a big part in Grenada.
Okay, was it he living?
You may not know his name, but it's important.
Was he living? Where was he living though?
He lived between here and the States, but spent time in Grenada, and I'm sure it's Guyanese.
Right. I was thinking, wasn't he living here? Yeah, so that's probably why.
He went to the States quite early.
Right.
People whose names we know here, writers and things.
All right. Brother Omwali, I'm going to come back to you, so stay tuned. Yeah. And Auntie Valerie, like I said, anytime you want to come through, let me know. Just raise your hand, and we'll interrupt anybody. You want to speak now?
I'm just about to head out.
Okay.
One of the things that just quickly struck me when Kobena was asked about the arms is the fact that it's amazing that even now, 40 years later, there's a lot about the revolution that people have been in the midst of it do not share.
Yes.
In protection of whatever purpose.
Yes.
I'm not saying that you didn't want to share Kobena, but it just struck me that there's so much, and it doesn't matter which side of the situation it came. Things about internal conflicts and issues and personality issues, and so that now that we're older and wiser, we are more aware of. We can now interpret behaviors based on that.
Yes.
And people don't talk about it. To quote unquote outsiders, they talk internally about it, but they still hide a lot of things.
Yes.
But I have to say thanks for inviting me. And,
thank you, Auntie Valerie.
I move on to another assignment. And
yes, much appreciated. Much appreciated. We certainly will be. And thank you very much. We're honored to have your presence. Yeah, have a good rest of your day.
You too. Right? Bye.
May I make 2 points?
You may, Elder Cecil. I was coming to you just before you come in, Elder Cecil. As you can probably see, brothers and sisters, Brother Apoku in Trinidad and Tobago is having a warm time getting on. Yeah, something. It's like we need Ogun to clear the way. Yeah, for the internet in a Tobago. So please, Ogun, we make an offering to Ogun right here now symbolically and ask him to just clear the way, for Brother Opoku to come through. But we'll see how that goes. But he's working hard and trying to get through. Go ahead, Elder Cecil.
Yes, I just wanted to say that the point about leadership conflicts and so on, people are saying that these things are not discussed. But it's important that we recognize that Bernard Cord has a book which is a full account of his view of these issues, and we should analyze and read and understand what he says and judge. And it's difficult to judge, but importantly, the position is incredibly detailed and analytically coherently set out in his work. So that's my first point. The second point is about geopolitics. Of course, the Americans regard the Caribbean as strategically theirs, but they regard everywhere as strategic.
Very true.
Everywhere as strategically theirs. But that's not really the point I'm wanting to make. The point I'm wanting to make is that we have it on record from Maurice that within a month of the Grenada Revolution, the Americans sent a representative who was based in Grenada to talk to them about what they, the Americans, wanted them to do and not do.
Yes,
and amongst the things they didn't want them to do was to have any links with Cuba, and indeed to have any links with Jamaica, which at the time was led by the very bad Michael Manley. and it's all set out. Maurice told us what the Americans were saying. They were still expressing some kind of support for Geary, but they weren't offering any support to the revolutionary government. Indeed, I think they offered a grant of $5,000 US.
Yes, I thought you were going to come to that. $5,000.
Yeah. So, right from the start, they understood the possibility that this was a serious revolution. You know, they do research, and they kind of know who they're dealing with. They'd watch developments within Grenada. They'd watch the overthrow and so on, and they had a sense of what it might mean. And they came to tell the Grenadian leadership America's terms for their survival and to lay out the framework. And that's what eventually played out, including trying to kill the leadership in its entirety. In the same month that they killed Walter, in
1980.
So it's important that we register the real nature of the international capitalist, imperialist, racist opposition that the Grenada
100%
revolution faced. And one or two other things, I won't go on for too long. It's important that we register that other, at least one Black Caribbean country had attempted an armed revolution. In Trinidad and Tobago, in the early 1970s, a group called National Union of Freedom Fighters actually attempted an armed uprising against the Eric Williams government. They all got wiped out. One of them was a sister of our sister, what's her name, who was up here in the UK Panthers.
Olive Morris.
No.
Africa Bantu.
Althea LeConte. Jones.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes. Yes.
Her sister. That's her maiden name. Her sister was one of the people who died in that armed attempt, Cuban style, FOCO, to overthrow the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So,
all right,
it's not that nothing had been attempted. Indeed,
100%.
In the early 60s, there had been a Rastafari type led attempted uprising in Jamaica.
Yes.
And there's a challenge in which armed soldiers died.
Yes. I'm going to stay with you for a minute here now, just to let the panel know where I'm going to go with this. And I think Brother Kwabena's statement is a wise one, in the sense of the fact that the complexities of October 19th is a show in and of itself. And many people only see the Grenada Revolution through that lens. There is so much concerning post that period to do with the American invasion, the Grenada 17.
It was 19. It was 19.
Was 19. Yes.
I think it started off at 20.
Right.
You missed, I missed that one out.
Right, and also the more recent campaigns in relation to the return of Maurice Bishop's body. So I want to get there. In terms of after this question that I'm going to ask Elder Cecil, I'm going to go to Brother Omawale to talk about the politics of the Caribbean region. Following that point, and what took place. What was the environment of the Caribbean politically after 1983, and then we're going to get into the trial, some stuff to do with the trial, and then the recent campaigns, for justice in relation to this issue, and so on. Now, Elder Cecil, you just mentioned something about America coming and promising a certain number of in a grant if Grenada was prepared to play ball at that time. They in fact at a later point tried to cajole the Caribbean Development Bank into not giving Grenada any money for development after that.
Led with Cord as their leader was extraordinarily competent at raising money. There was
right. That's what I'm going to ask you about. So stay tuned here. Let me just get the backdrop here.
Including the money for the airport. So
right. So that's what I'm coming to. That's exactly where I'm coming to, And last week I played an extended piece of a documentary during which Bernard Cord was discussing this, and how he was able to amass that money. But just to note that the head of the Caribbean Development Bank at the time was a man by the name of William Dumas, and he basically told America to go to hell. They can't tell him what to do with the money, and so that never worked, However, we are here discussing Western imperialism. Yes. And Bernard Cord, as you said in his book and in his speeches, declares openly him go around the world. And the European Union was very happy with them in terms of how they were balancing the book, so to speak. And all kinds of other places that they got these funds from, right? So does it, from your perspective, right? Well, there's a two-part question. The first part is there are debates that take place in terms of the fact that the leading lights of the revolution were openly socialist leading, but didn't necessarily project that through the actual revolutionary processes, in terms of their organizational work, or there's an extent to which they did and they didn't, To what extent, where do you lie on that particular argument? Why didn't they come in and nationalize everything? The banks, them, and the whole, and everything like that, right? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, from a revolutionary point of view, does funds coming from the European Union negatively impact our perception as revolutionaries on the value and the quality and the purity of the revolutionary process in general?
Before you begin, Comrade Cecil, let me just say this. The revolution had a particular head of state, namely Queen Elizabeth II.
Yes.
The revolution was actually Her Majesty's People's Revolutionary Government, because the revolutionary leadership, when they took power, kept the Governor General,
they did,
Queen's representative in Grenada, as head of state.
Yes.
Now, you could say, these guys are crazy, they're revolutionaries. Why are they bowing to all of these trappings of colonialism? They took a decision, which was, if we come in, nationalize everything. One, we're going to frighten away investment, which we'll need, irrespective of whether socialist or not. You're going to need them. If we nationalize everything, people are going to be frightened. Grenadians are going to be frightened about their own property, no matter how supportive they may have been of the revolution. If we get rid of the Queen's representative, of head of state, and become a republic, we will lose the link with all of the Commonwealth countries. We have an ability to speak directly to heads of state of the government across the world. And so you can take certain decisions which are righteous, but are disastrous.
Yes.
Say until October the 19th, they managed to
negotiate that. I'd agree for the most part. I think that in Baba Tony Martin's second edition of In Nobody's Backyard, he speaks to that fact that they strategically maintained membership of certain organizations in the Americas in order to have a voice on certain issues, and as well as the non-aligned movement, Paul Schoon, and one might say that his surname contained one too many letters, but the the issue where that is concerned is that he became one of the focal points for the undoing of the revolutionary process. Yeah, it was him that the Americans relied upon. Yes, but the interesting point about that though is even though he was maintained, the constitution that maintained him in place was removed at the beginning of the revolution. So that was an interesting. They cancelled they suspended the constitution, but yet maintained him in. So you can see there was a strategy in play here. Do you know what I'm saying? But it's just to note, that when America invaded, they relied upon Schoon, yes, as their man on the ground, so to speak. But honestly, so feel free to continue.
Yeah. I agree with much of the thrust of what's just been said, because my experience of the Grenada leadership was that they were strategically very sound.
Right.
And Bernard Cord, in addition to being a Marxist revolutionary, was also a good economist.
Yes.
And what they had to manage was an economy that needed development, that had sectors, that they had to make decisions about the sense or nonsense, the temporality, whether you do it at once or not, of things like nationalization. In fact, they nationalized very little. They nationalized the ill-gotten gains of Eric Geary. So they nationalized some hotels, and they nationalized that it was a newspaper at one stage.
Point.
And maybe one other thing. And
importantly, they didn't. So importantly, they didn't nationalize the bank.
Exactly so. So I had discussions with them, and they said, and our brother has already made the point, that not losing the support of certain sectors, call them class fractions, within Grenada, actually mattered. And I also had talks with representatives of that class fraction. And amongst them, people were saying, we know the boys, and they're not this and they're not that, and they're not the next thing, because they didn't feel menaced. And they knew exactly, because it had been fully explained to them, what the economic strategy of the leadership was, including the problem of getting so much money in that finding projects that you could properly manage to absorb the money was actually one of the problems of the revolution. All of that had to be managed. So it wasn't a question of what it might have been, but the answer wasn't to be hyper revolutionary or super revolutionary. The answer was, and the strategy was, to manage the economy in the world in which we live, manage an economy in the state that it was, which included doing stuff like making sure that fruit was exported rather than rotted, trying to make sure that fruit was canned rather than rotting, and so on and so forth. So when you go and look at what they did, and somebody said I went more than once. I only went once, and it wasn't for all that long. It was on the first anniversary of the revel, because I'd done that interview with Dennis and had been teaching Grenada and Caribbean and revolutionary history to some people and so on. So I was invited as a guest of the revolution. But the great thing about that moment, given that it was first anniversary, is that people were out there, and I mean Bernard and his wife and others were out there explaining what the policies were of the revolution. And then, in terms of their preparation, somebody mentioned that the first decree, I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but I'm sure it is, that the first decree addressed the issue of ceasing the exploitation of women, the sexist exploitation of women. But their capacity in that first moment to issue all of those decrees that made sense, that had been thought through, that handled the situation with precision and excellence and revolutionary consciousness is one of the striking things about that revolution.
Yes, yes.
The other thing about that revo was the quality of Maurice Bishop as a personality, as an intellectual, and as a speaker.
Yes.
He was actually a better speaker than Michael Manley.
Yes.
And that's extraordinary because Michael was very good.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, yeah. So much can be said about Maurice Bishop, the person. Yeah, I don't know. My spirit took to that man at a very young age. Right? You know what I'm saying? But there was something about that man. I'm gonna come to you, brother.
Had to be young.
Yeah, I was. I tell you, I'm gonna come to you, brother. I'm gonna come to you, brother Kwabena. The first place I can remember learning about Maurice Bishop was in the documentary of brother Menelik Shabazz, yeah, noted filmmaker in this country. He had a documentary called Time and Judgment, yeah.
Yes.
And he features, he just basically documenting the experience of the African world during the 1980s. And he has a feature on Maurice Bishop and the Grenada Revolution. And I'll be watching that documentary from my idea, my knee, from my bum, and I know life without it.
Incidentally, I am the researcher and commentary writer of that film. I worked with Shabazz on 4 of his films.
Okay. I'm aware of that. Yes, I was aware of that. Yeah. And you worked on The People's Voice or something like that as well?
People's Account, yes.
The People's Account, yes.
And two others.
Yes. All right. So beautiful. All right, we're getting questions through. So I'm noting the questions. If you got a question or a comment, please at GotKush TV. I'm gonna come to brother Kwabena and I'm gonna come to brother Omawale. So go ahead, brother Kwabena. You got a point you want to make?
Yes. Brother Cecil, you probably know this, but if I can say to our audience, the Americans attempted to destabilize through the banks the revolution.
Yeah.
All of the banks in Grenada were foreign owned. Yet, one after the other, they suddenly decided to close for reasons best known to the head office. Bernard Cord writes how the revolution effectively dealt with those banks. We took them over. They weren't nationalized. They were taken into state ownership. Furthermore, sectoral banks were developed by the revolution, including a development bank for agriculture and industry, and a bank in competition with these other banks that had recently been taken over into state ownership, a truly Grenadian bank. Now, the reason the people understood what was happening, so that these laws that came into effect, these policies that came into effect, is that they had discussed them in the preparation of the manifesto, in preparation for the revolution or for the coming into power of the New Jewel movement. So it was not a surprise. It was what's going on. Now, subsequently, the Revo made some missteps because they did things which they didn't articulate in a way that people could understand. And that caused certain friction.
Okay.
But the one thing that the revolution did is it created a huge amount of confidence amongst the people of Grenada and the black people of the Caribbean, the African and Indian and indigenous people of the Caribbean had the confidence raised as a result of this revolution. They said, look, we can do this. And I'll give you an example. The airport that you mentioned. Now, the narrative the Americans would like you to believe, there's one narrative which was it was a secret Soviet base. The other narrative was that it was all Cuban money and it was all Soviet money. Totally untrue. About the same time as relationship with Cuba was established between the government of Grenada and the Cuban government, the Canadian government, the PRG, decided we are going to build an airport. It was necessary. and we were going to build it irrespective of who we got the money from, or if they
Yeah.
gave us money or not. We would build it with our own resources. It was vital.
Yes.
Subsequently, years later, I spoke to Sir Royston Hopkins, one of the then leading hoteliers in Grenada.
Yes, yes.
Were it not for that international airport built by the revolution, the
Yes.
business sector in Grenada would have been much smaller and much poorer.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, very good point. Yeah, very good point. And it actually relates to one of the questions that we've got in the chat. Brothers and sisters, if you've got a question that you want to ask in the chat, feel free to @GotKush TV. I will, if we have time, and our guests don't mind a little bit of overtime, open up the panel for brothers and sisters that we want to come live and interact. Yeah. But for now, please get your questions in @GotKush TV. Right, we're gonna come to the dynamics following the revolution, and I want to begin with looking at the Caribbean region and its politics here. Now, Brother Omawale, as you all know, one of the significant shifts, the political spectrum shifts significantly in the Caribbean in alignment with the Western world in terms of neoliberalism, right-wing politics, and so the reign of Thatcher and Reagan significantly impacts the Caribbean and South America, and Reagan in particular in that regard, Now, the revolution is known to have created an environment in which Grenada was one of the, if not the only significantly growing and developing nation in the Caribbean. At this point, Just from your research and your understanding of the politics of the 1980s in the Caribbean, what impact do you think the defeat of the revolution, so to speak, and the American invasion had on the Caribbean region?
I think it's a very significant impact. I made the comment before that the success of the revolution, in some ways was a victory for the Black Power movement that was taking place during the time period. And I would argue the destruction of the revolution was actually the final defeat or destruction of the Black Power movement from that particular period of history. And to really understand what was going on in the region, I think we have to understand the regional backlash against this Black Power movement, that it wasn't just, the resistance that the revolution in Grenada faced, but this was going on, throughout the region. So, for example, you mentioned Walter Rani earlier. Not only was Walter Rani assassinated in Ghana, but he was actually banned from Jamaica, where he'd been teaching at the university. And in addition to Jamaica, there's a few other Caribbean nations that had banned him as well. Makandal Daga, the Black Power leader from Trinidad, he'd been banned, throughout the region as well. Stokely Michael Kwame Toure, from Trinidad, and during this particular time period, he was also banned from Trinidad. So what we see regionally, that there's a backlash against the Black Power movement. So the destruction of the revolution in Grenada, as I said, to me, I see it as the final defeat of the Black Power movement. So following what happened with the revolution in Grenada, you have a situation where there really isn't much of a movement left in the 1980s, because so many of the activists have been banned, throughout, and so many parties and movements have been repressed or destroyed. Bob Sissel mentioned enough national fighters in Trinidad and movement will be destroyed by the government there. So during this time period, you didn't really have much of a grassroots movement, taking place, because, as I said, so many of these movements had been crushed and suppressed. But the other problem, those who were in positions of political power, as you said, they started changing their policies, changing the politics, moving towards more of a neoliberal type of approach. And the two places where we see this is, first of all, in Jamaica, in the 1980s, with the assistance of the United States, Michael Manley's actually moved from power. So when he comes back into power in Jamaica, he drops being a democratic socialist and he moves to more of a neoliberal type of position. I mentioned Forbes Burnham's political party in Ghana, same situation. After Burnham died, the PNC in Ghana essentially dropped Burnham's vision of cooperative socialism, so that the PNC today doesn't preach any type of socialism, doesn't preach any type of anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, or any type of Pan-Africanism. So not only following the destruction of the Grenada Revolution do we see, just like I said, the suppression of different grassroots movements, but even those who are in positions of political power, we see them, becoming more moderate in the political positions. Political parties and political leaders who used to be outwardly socialists, dropped socialism, and as you mentioned, started aligning more with these political policies. But to me, when I think of the destruction of the revolution in Grenada, I think of that shift happening in the 1980s, 1990s. Yeah. Continues to this day, to the point where you don't really see any governments in the Caribbean that would feel comfortable coming out right and taking these positions. And I mentioned the PNC before. PNC was Barnum's political party. In 2015, Ghana had an election and the PNC was re-elected into power. And for the 5 years that the PNC was in power, you didn't see any of this type of talk or type of ideology that Burnham of anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, Pan-Africanism, and sort of thing. So, to me, that's what happened with the destruction of the Grenada Revolution. It completely shifted the politics of the region.
Yes. And the PNC still maintains the red, black, and green colors, right?
Yeah.
Somebody,
not the only thing they still maintain from Burnham.
You know what I'm saying? Somebody even tell them for leave that alone. Take it out of the colors. Anyway, sure. We're vexed when we see them something there. Elder Cecil, I'm gonna come to you because you have your hand up, and then there's a question in the chat that actually relates to what we're talking about right now. So I'm going to take that question, and then we'll move on to the more recent issues in terms of the campaign for justice, Grenada 17 to 19, and the return of Maurice Bishop's body. Go ahead, Elder Cecil.
Yes. It's important to register, and I think it's understood and has already been said, that even though 79 looked like a year of revolution, London Bridge is falling down and all that is a song that symbolizes that. That fundamentally isn't what was happening. What was happening was the rise of Thatcher and Reagan and the right winger in Germany and so on. And it's the moment at which capitalist imperialism comes back on the attack. So that in the 60s and 70s, they seem to be in retreat. But we enter a new period with that time. And in our region, you have Siaga and Adams and Eugenia Charles, overt ones, and there are some less overt ones that had carried the same politics. So that's the continent. It's also important to remember.
Sorry, Elder Cecil, just to add, because of its significance to this particular topic, Tom Adams in Barbados,
I did say Adams.
I missed it. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. But just to put some flesh on that, Tom Adams as the head of Barbados, the American embassy was stationed in Barbados, and so the Americans coordinated their CIA offensive on Grenada significantly from Barbados with the willing assistance of Tom Adams in Barbados. Just to point that out. Go ahead.
I agree. And it's important to note also that one of the revolutions of 79 was the Nicaraguan Revolution. And it's important to note the way in which it was taken down, including capitalism, imperialism, selling drugs into the African American community as the way of funding the destruction of effectively a people's revolution. The Nicaraguan Revolution was entirely justified. It had come to power in a legitimate civil war against the most negative, terrible forces relating to ordinary people. And that is what America undermined by getting drugs and selling the drugs into the African American community as a way of funding the Contras to defeat the Nicaraguan Revolution. And Nicaragua is in the Caribbean, and we have to remember that that's one of the realities that we face. Now, the implosion of the Grenada Revolution, the impact of that politically on the left within the Caribbean cannot be exaggerated. The left in Jamaica fell apart. There's a party, the left party there, I forget, that just effectively packed up and went home, led by Trevor Monroe. And the Caribbean left has not yet recovered from the Grenadian Revolution and from that implosion, from preparing to turn its guns on the people and to turn its guns on itself. And if something more complex than that happened, it's very important to understand that the impact of that is still very much there. It's a big inhibitor on left ideas and practice in our region.
100%. It's necessary to know also in that context that literally, using the Nicaragua example, the American government funded regimes, dictatorships all over the Americas in order to institute neoliberal policies. Yeah. During the 70s and the 80s, it's absolute madness what was going on during that period of time. So thank you for adding that, Elder Cecil. I'm going to ask this question coming from Coffee Campbell. Now, brothers and sisters, when we're dealing with the history of the Grenada Revolution, Ronald Reagan is extremely important, and so whenever we're raising the voice of Maurice Bishop, it's only natural, yes, that the voice of Ronald Reagan will come from hell to attempt to, throw some shade on the thing. All right, and so I'm assuming that this is where this question is coming from, because neoliberalism and capitalism must be defended, right? And that's what Grenada represented a threat to. And so the question is asked: Got Kush TV, Grenada is an upper middle income country today. If Bishop wasn't overthrown, would they achieve this and better? If so, why? Yeah. Now I'm going to keep this question up for brothers and sisters. Anybody can answer it.
Let's just deal with that one.
Go ahead.
The trajectory of economic development established by the Grenadian Revolution, including the airport, which has already been mentioned, were transformative, economically transformative. And I have no reason to doubt that had the Grenada Revolution not come to an end in the way it did, that Grenada would have continued to benefit from it, as indeed it has, and would be where it is today. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? What is a middle income a significant indicator of success? As from our perspective,
it depends on success for who.
Right.
Anybody can use terms like that to make a point. I mean, I know the brother who's asking the point. He's been on the show with us, and so in a way, it's where he's coming from on his belief in the efficacy of capitalism is well known, and that's a point about the efficacy of capitalism. Post the Grenada Revolution, Grenada has succeeded. Would it have succeeded had the revolution remained in place? Which is what I think the question asked.
Yes, it's effectively, yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Brother Comino.
Right. I would support Brother Cecil in his critique of the term middle income. We are told in Britain, time after time, that Britain is the 5th wealthiest country in the world. How is it, if that's the case, that a considerable number of British people of all colors are having to attend food banks? How is it that people cannot pay for their heating? How is it that people are having poor health outcomes? How is it that the police are thinking about forming a union because of the police, of all people, thinking of
Babylon?
Babylon. They can't get enough money. How is it that left, right, and center strikes have been taking place? So it may be that if you average it out, yes, everyone should be getting £50,000 a year, but of course, not everyone is getting £50,000 a year. So in terms of the statistics, Grenada may be a middle income country, whatever that means. The facts are that 1/3 of Grenadians are living in absolute poverty. The situation, if you saw them, you would have think they have not moved 1 inch from when Bernard Cord wrote about his visit to his grandparents in the country, where women didn't have knickers. They didn't have the money. They didn't have bras. They didn't have panties and so on. They had to make them out of flour sack and that sort of thing. You would think that the 30% now have not moved 1 inch from that thing. So let us look at what we can actually say. During the revolution, the incomes of Grenadians, of ordinary Grenadians who were working and not owning, did not move that much. But with the social wage, it moved tremendously. What does the social wage mean? It means that in the first days of the revolution, school fees were cut by 50%. So if you were paying school fees, you no longer had to pay them. In 6 months, school fees were abolished. So again, you had money in your pocket. Your wages may not have gone up, but you had money in your pocket. In 18 months, I think it was, books and other paraphernalia required for education was not required. In the 4 years of the revolution, 400 to 500 Grenadians went abroad to study on scholarship. 1 penny did they have to pay. That again was part of the social wage mix in the country. And this is just a few of some of the aspects of the social wage. The PRG, the People's Revolutionary Government, established a national insurance scheme alongside providing free healthcare at a serious level for the people of Grenada. Why is the national insurance scheme so important? It means that for the first time ever, every Grenadian had the prospect of getting a pension when they retired from work. Previously, unless you were in the police, the civil service, or a teacher, forget about getting a pension, or unless you're working for one of the big firms. With the setting up of the national insurance scheme, you were insured whether you're an estate worker or a road worker, you're going to get the pension. And let me tell you that the national insurance scheme still survives. They didn't abolish it. The surprising thing is that when you look through their brochure, no mention is made of the Grenada Revolution, as it is absolutely taken out of the picture. And that national insurance scheme is what saved successive governments of Grenada, where the money in the national insurance scheme could be loaned to the government. So successful it was. There were several things that the revolution did which improved the expenditure of not necessarily their earned income.
Well,
healthcare. You left out of the social wage package.
No, I mentioned it. I mentioned it very, very briefly.
Too briefly, perhaps, because I saw the provision of new health care in Grenada in that first year after the revolution, especially free clinics. All over the island.
It would be good to do an assessment of the extent of that development and the extent to which things have developed since then, using indicators other than quote unquote middle income. Like look at the number of hospitals, the quality of education, what I'm saying, whether it's free or not, how much people are able to afford that, that education. What we do know is, as Brother Kwabena was alluding to, about 40% of the population is considered to be living below the poverty line. In Grenada today. I've seen as high as 40. I've seen between like 35 and 32 to 40. But you're right. So let's say in the region of a third. Which is significant. That's a significant amount of poverty for any nation. Brother Omowale, did you have a point on this question? Or
I mean, the only thing I would add to it is, obviously we can't speak to what would have happened if Bishop wasn't overthrown, but we can certainly speak to what he actually did in the years that he was in power. And I mean, as we've already discussed throughout the panel, that the revolution in Grenada did improve the lives of people in Grenada in a number of ways, in terms of improving services in the country, even the economy. Unemployment rate was actually significantly reduced during the revolution in Grenada. So there were a lot of positive things that were accomplished during this time period. So as I said, I don't know how useful it is to try to ascertain what would have happened if Bishop wasn't overthrown, but we can certainly see the results of what was done during the period of the revolution in Grenada, and I would argue that those results were very positive, not only within the context of Grenada, but when you compare what was going on in Grenada at the time to other Caribbean countries regionally, that there were ways that Grenada was progressing during the period of time where many other countries in the region were actually struggling. in the late 70s and 80s.
Go ahead, brother Kwame. Before you speak, though, I want to commend you for whatever juju you was working when you posted this to me, because it arrived. Yeah. So you was working that good juju, and it arrived very quickly. So I'll put it up just to say that this booklet, by our own hands, it gives some very basic information, on the Grenada Revolution, and a lot of what Brother Kwabena is speaking to at the moment. Yeah, it's very important that we understand the successes of the Grenada Revolution, what they were able to achieve. But yeah, go ahead. It's called by our own hands, A People's History of the Grenadian Revolution, by Brother Kwabena, Steve Cushion, with introductions from Luke Daniels and an epilogue by Chris Searle. So go ahead, Brother Kwabena.
Okay, just two things. Firstly, I think you mentioned earlier that when people talk about the Grenada Revolution, what they mean is October the 19th. All that we've discussed is lost.
Yes.
Who did this on October the 19th? Who was plotting? Who did this? Who did the other? Hold on.
Yes.
Up to October the 19th, this is what we have done. And I haven't, we haven't even touched probably on about 10% of the benefits that were brought.
100%. Yeah.
So the book was written to say, hey, look, this is what we have done, because the Americans would want to wipe that out of the way and focus your attention on, look at these Marxists who kill each other and so on. Secondly, the discussion is done around the basis of if Maurice Bishop had not been overthrown, rather than if the revolution had not collapsed.
Yes.
The revolution had not collapsed. Bishop was great. I, for one, can tell you, I would listen to Maurice reading a telephone directory. It's so fantastic. Seriously.
Wonderful. Yeah.
You listen to this man, and you don't actually hear what he's saying. You're just mesmerized. Especially his speech, where he said, we're in nobody's backyard. It articulated what he said. However, he was killed.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
I think with him, the revolution died. It is the revolution that, if Maurice Bishop had eaten a rotten tomato or had fell over, broken his neck or whatever, and the revolution has succeeded, then yes, you would have seen things happen. Remember, the international airport was about to be opened. This major project in 4 years. Healthcare was humming along. 400 students would have been returning to Grenada to give to the country that sent them on these scholarships. And by the way, these people are now retiring. Okay? Grenada experienced, if you like, a cultural revolution during the revolution. Where Grenada had moved from this backward place where people did not have confidence in themselves to a place where, look, we're doing this thing. We have no problem with doing that thing, and so on. But it's the collapse of the revolution, exemplified by the killing of Maurice. That's not Maurice. Okay. Revolution. Sorry.
Thank you very much, brother. And I think that one of the things that a conversation like this allows us to do, because Maurice Bishop does take up a lot of the airspace, and rightly so for what he represented. But at the same time, there was serious organizing going on at every level that we can miss if we just get lost in Maurice Bishop, the good speaker. Yes, he himself must have had significant organizational capacity, and the party itself and the people themselves must have had significant organizational capacity to be able to achieve what they did, even with all of the pressures that were on them during this time. So that's very important. We're getting close to overtime period. So let me fast forward slightly, because there are some very present issues regarding a lot of this, and I'm going to ask Brother Kwabena to speak to this. So we don't have time to go into the depth of the trial period, but what becomes known as the Grenada 17 is made up of the 3 army personnel that eventually shot Maurice Bishop, as well as members of the leadership, as well as other people that were just around, and all of these people are charged with conspiring to assassinate Maurice Bishop. However, for at least the majority of them, and I say at least the majority of them because some of them I have serious questions about. I'm thinking of one person in particular, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Yeah, but it is known today that to a significant degree, the charges against these people, including, well, it is understood today. I should say I shouldn't say known. Last week we had a brother from Grenada who still believes that Cord in particular conspired against Maurice Bishop. Yeah, and because of where we're trying not to go into that detail today, I'm not sure if I want to go into that. At the same time, it was considered to be the case that Cord and many of the others were in fact innocent of the conspiracy to murder and assassinate Maurice Bishop, whatever other mistakes they may have made. Yeah, let's put it that way. Okay, and so there's a whole campaign throughout the 90s, yes, and the early 2000s, which eventually becomes assisted by Amnesty International for the release of the Grenada 17. Okay, some, as Elder Cecil has said, have come out and written, and they were eventually released in between 2008 and 2010, I believe it is. Am I correct in saying that?
The dates aren't in my head, but they were eventually released.
All right.
After quite a time in prison.
Yeah, they did 26
years. Yeah, 26 years.
In prison. Yeah.
Right. And so I'm just explaining this for the sake of the viewers, yeah, to contextualize where we're going to go with the conversation. Okay, so bear with me, yeah. And so then they're released. Some come out like Bernard Cord. Bernard Cord writes 3 books. Yeah, right, on the situation and gives his account of the situation. He's also featured in a couple of documentaries. Others like Selwyn Strawn, when have traveled the world speaking, yes, and answering very difficult questions. I've been at some of these sessions with Selwyn Strawn, for example, and my own father was asking him some serious, hard questions. Yeah, and then others like Austin, General Austin, who died a couple years ago, haven't said anything and died unrepentant. Yeah, not just in relation to what happened with Bishop, but what he was at the helm of after Bishop had passed in terms of martial law. Hudson Austin basically abolished the government and declared martial law, and a shoot and kill policy of martial. You're shaking your head. I've got something wrong, Robert Covenant. Go ahead. I didn't want to go into that, but you feel free to correct me if I'm
this requires, and I would depend upon Comrade Brother Cecil to correct me. Requires a week of discussion.
Okay. Can I suggest then that we don't go into it? Yeah.
But let me just.
All right, go on.
It's a simple, and some would say simplistic, analysis of what happened on the 19th, which was there is Cord, big bushy beard, thick glasses, funny afro hair, fat.
Yes.
And it's this Marxist, sort of a Pol Pot figure. Here is Maurice.
Yes, good looking. Yeah.
Good looking, articulate. Kwabena would want to listen to him every day.
Yes.
This Cord was jealous and wanted to assassinate this guy. And this guy was assassinated. How simple, how easy. Let us look at certain things. Not going into it, but 3.
Go on.
There were soldiers who are known to each other who pulled the trigger on Maurice and the others.
Yes.
3 of them are alleged to have been sentenced for manslaughter, and they served 26 years.
Yes.
During the 26 years, after about the first year or so, they never said Cord did it. Cord told us to do it.
Gave order, yes.
Right. So after the first year, you would think they'd say, I don't fancy spending the rest of my life in prison. Let me cough up Cord. No one has said
that Cord did.
Austin, you were playing Cord, did this and so on. The soldiers have stated what they've stated, and it is for us to find out. The soldiers are still alive and in Grenada. They can be asked their role and when they want to. I think there was only one soldier I saw on that Bruce Paddington film, For Whatever, and he said, I was the last one that Maurice Bishop saw. The Americans wanted to liquidate the remaining leaders of the revolution, particularly Cord. Cord has told me that after they were captured by the Americans, they a gentleman whose name he does not know, but who will recognize again if necessary, offered him the premiership of Grenada, providing Grenada changed its path. Now, it could be court is saying something that's self-serving, or it could be that this was an offer genuinely made. The thing is that once things had settled, the Americans had taken a decision to execute these people.
100%, yes.
And they would do it through Grenadians. Just like after a slave uprising, they would get compliant slaves who are fearful of themselves being executed to go against the those who took part in the uprising. It's much more complex, much more difficult. In some cases, banal as to what happened.
No, I agree, Brother Kwabena. Yeah, and be assured that I don't mean to oversimplify. We're just running through the context.
I'm not talking about no.
I know. Yeah.
When you go out and people say, "Well, that chord," you know. That
no. You're correct. You're correct to clarify. You're correct to clarify. Yeah.
And by the way, that was a view. That was a view that I had taken after the invasion.
I
can't go on.
Did it?
May I make a small point?
Yeah.
And it is that there really was no legal case against the people who were held for all of that time.
That's where I was going to go. Yes.
And so it's important that we bear that in mind.
Yes. Except of course, the men who admit to having pulled the trigger. But yes, that's another matter. Yeah.
That is indeed another matter.
Yes.
The convictions were extraordinarily, almost idiotic, and the Amnesty International report actually demolished it, and there are other demolitions left, right, and center.
100%.
So what happened is still a matter for exploration, explanation, whatever.
Definitely.
There's nothing we can do on the basis of the fact that people were convicted.
Not at all. So just to clarify, the 17 were initially up for death penalty, and a campaign to take them for the death penalty.
Not the 17.
Dropped off.
Three of the soldiers were given life imprisonment for manslaughter. The remainder were convicted of murder.
Right. Yes, indeed. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah, Brother Dwayne Amwale has had to drop off, brothers and sisters. So we thank him for joining us. We're gonna. I don't know how long my other brothers have to give me, but I promise not to try and keep you too long. Okay. What I want to do, however, is get to the point whereby we've gone through the trial was trumped up. They were sentenced to life. And then they were eventually released after 20 odd years. Yeah. Now, after Maurice Bishop, yes, and let me call their names. Yeah. Let me call the rest of their names. So the people that were lined up and executed: Fitzroy Bain, Norris Bain, Evelyn Maitland, I believe that's Cecil Evelyn Maitland. Yeah. Jacqueline Kreft, who is Maurice Bishop's pregnant partner.
Yeah.
Who lined up and gunned down. Mother of what his son Vladimir, who was eventually stabbed to death in Canada. Just want to point that out in Toronto.
I don't know if she was the mother of Vlad, but I will.
I could be wrong. Yeah, I could be wrong on that, but that's fine. Yeah, but Jacqueline Kreft was said to be pregnant with his child at the time of being assassinated or killed. Executed. Yeah, we have Unison Whiteman, who has already been mentioned, Evelyn Bullen, and then Keith Haling. These are those who were lined up and shot by firing squad. Yes, along with Maurice Bishop. All of these bodies, if I'm not mistaken, disappear. Yes, and there's a rumor that they were piled up and burnt somewhere, but there's never been any evidence of this. Yeah, and so nobody's ever been able to find the remains. And I've seen an interview with Maurice Bishop's mother and his sister, and they speak about the pain of not being able to bury their brother and their son. Yes, and so Brother Kwabena, there's been an ongoing campaign for the return of Maurice Bishop's remains. Yeah. Now, one might say, well, if it disappeared, or wait there for it return. Please explain, yes, the nature of this particular campaign and the dynamics of it, because it's relevant to our development today.
Yes, since the invasion, whether you supported supposedly one group or the other, or supported the Americans, there has been a murmur of where is Maurice Bishop? Where is Maurice Bishop? And about 2 or 3 years ago, a group of us here in Britain decided we're going to mount a campaign to force the Americans to give an explanation of where the remains of these comrades are.
Sorry, Brother Kwabena. Sorry, I should have also put, for context purposes, America invades on the 26th of October. Yes. And basically it's under control of the island for over a year.
Yes.
Yeah. They take control of the political establishment, the economy, and everything. All right. So yeah. So just to put that in the story as well. Go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
Now the bodies didn't disappear, for good or ill, after Maurice was killed along with the others. The bodies were taken by the army, the People's Revolutionary Army. And almost certainly all of them were taken to Camp Fedon, named after the same Fedon who mounted the uprising in 1790s. And some appear to have been burnt, and others were buried within Camp Fedon in a place called Calivini, further south of the capital, in one branch of the island, going one way, and so on.
Yes.
The Americans invaded. I think they invaded on the 25th. And there is photographic evidence of them recovering the remains. Absolutely. We have published on our website the photographs of the bodies being recovered, and they were recovered along with by the Americans' grave recovery team. They've got a team that goes out and recovers remains, people in the Korean War, American soldiers in the Korean War who have fallen down, the remains are discovered. This team goes out, or soldiers get killed and this team goes out straight away and makes sure they're recovered and brought back to America. These grave recovery soldiers were assisted by members of Jamaican Defense Force, and we have evidence as to who it was in the Jamaican Defense Force that recovered the bodies. In addition, American officials were visiting Grenada at the same time, and they invited members of the press to see where the bodies were recovered from. Okay, and the bodies were taken from there, we believe, either to the hospital, the General Hospital, and then to the St. George's University Medical School, an American medical school, or vice versa. Thereafter, bodies disappeared. Okay. Now, there's a legal principle that states if you have taken over de facto control of a country, then you are responsible for what happens in that country. So America is responsible for stating what happened. Now, could it be that the Americans were so incurious as to where the remains of Maurice Bishop were? Maybe they hadn't heard he'd been killed. Maybe they thought he was in the mountains somewhere. Of course, I'm being very, very sarcastic. They would have known that Maurice Bishop was killed and the army people had buried him at an army camp. They would have known. They then had control of the island. So, where the body there? Where the bodies? That's what we're saying. And so far, family members had over the years gone to the US government. Tell us what you did with the bodies. The government has refused to do so. So about 2 or 3 years ago, we decided to up the campaign. And as a result of the campaign, we have raised the profile ever so slightly. It's not a campaign. However, earlier this year, we got a British trade union the GMB trade union. It's one of the largest trade unions in the United Kingdom. They passed the motion without vote. They passed it without any opposition, calling upon the US government to return the remains. And the corollary was, if you don't have the remains, explain what you did with them.
What you did, right?
And that is there on our website as well. You can see the motion being discussed and so on.
What's the website, Brother Kwabena? Is that the For Whatever website?
Yes, the For Whatever website.
I was trying to post the link, and there seems to be an issue at the moment. So,
okay.
notify you about that. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I've given you the wrong link, but
no. It's not you. The link. I'm just looking at it, trying to find. Cause I'm familiar with the website. I was trying to get onto it just now, and there seems to be an issue. So check that out. But yeah, go ahead.
So what's happened now is we've got a petition in being, ready to launch, maybe within the next few days, next few weeks,
right.
Asking people to support us in getting the remains of Maurice Bishop and his comrades returned to Grenada, irrespective of what view you may have taken about whatever.
Yes.
We want the remains of our leader to be returned to Grenada, to go back to their families, to be given a decent burial. It is not right for America, which even now is recovering the remains of soldiers killed in their civil war. Remains of soldiers killed in the First European War, the Second European War, in the Korean War, in the Vietnam War. They send people out to search the jungle for their people.
Yes, sir.
They have got our people in their custody.
Yes, sir.
Not returning them. What kind of cruelty is this?
Wickedness. Yeah, wickedness. Yeah.
Right? Now, the reason they're doing it is that, of course, if Maurice Bishop's remains were returned to Grenada, or an explanation as to where they could be found was given, it would become a bit of a shrine. And then people would start to think about the revolution and what it means for them. So you've got that. Brother Cecil, I may have skipped things, or I may have been a bit too passionate or whatever.
I'm comfortable with everything you said on that matter, which is not something that I've been involved in, but I've noticed the campaign and wish it well.
We shall be sharing all the information about it once the petition is up and so on and so forth. I will add this. This is actually not limited to Maurice Bishop. Similar thing happened with Thomas Sankara. His body was spirited away after. And Thomas Sankara, by the way, the anniversary of his assassination was only 2 days ago. Yes, in the year 1987. And Patrice Lumumba. Yeah, whose remains were only returned about 2 years ago. They doused his body in acid, dissolved the entire body. The only thing that remained was his teeth. Right, and the teeth were shipped to Belgium. Yes, and a campaign for years to return the remains of Patrice Lumumba only succeeded a couple years ago. I learned the other day that the bones of Mbuya Nehanda from the 1800s, who was fighting, Lord of mercy, the British, yes, over 100 years ago, yes, are in England today. Mbuya Nehanda from Zimbabwe, yes, are in England today. Pardon?
1896.
That's right. Yeah, when she was assassinated, by the British fighting the anti-colonial war. Fear bones them still in England right here now. Yeah, this is how these people operate. Dedan Kimati, the family of Dedan Kimati. Yes, and powers of ascension to the spirit of Mama Mukami Kimati, who only passed away last year. Yes, sorry, earlier this year. Excuse me. Yes, was looking for the remains of her husband up until the day that she died. No. Yes, buried in some unmarked grave somewhere, supposedly, apparently in Kenya. This is how these people operate. Yeah. So it's very serious, and I think Brother Cobbin has put it in context deeply that these people travel all around the world, yes, looking for the remains of their soldiers. Yeah, and so this campaign is extremely important. My brothers, I wonder if you have a few moments to take some questions from the audience. I have so many more questions, but I'm gonna leave it there and go to the audience. Let me know how much time you have, and we'll judge it there.
Two
questions, okay? All right. Is that good, Brother Kwabena? Yeah. And so I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. The 2 questions, I'm gonna allow brothers and sisters to come on. Yeah. So I'm gonna forgive me for the ones that you've missed in the chat, brothers and sisters. I've seen you and I've started them all, but I'm gonna allow for 2 people to come and interact. Yeah, as our guests have allowed. So you can join the conversation. We're gonna do it this way. I'm gonna share the link in the chat. Click it very quickly, family. All right. Don't waste no time. Yeah, don't waste no time. Yeah, come through quickly. And we're going to take 2 comments or questions from the chat. No doubt, yeah, as Brother Cobbin said earlier in the conversation, you need a whole month to go through this history and delve into everything. And maybe we're going to have to arrange that at some point where we have a series of panels, yeah, that is able to break down different aspects of the thing. You know what I'm saying? And I would love to hear more from Auntie Valerie as well. So we have to get Mama Valerie back in here because I like how she talk, you know what I mean? I like how she break it down, all right? So family, the link is in the chat. The link is in the chat, and you can click that link to come through and join the conversation live, yeah? We're only going to take 2 because we want to respect the time of our guests this evening. And Elder Cecil, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to give a closing word. Yes, if you don't mind, because I like how you contextualize things, you know. In terms of the,
I've never been good at closing words, but I'll try.
Please, but you direct your closing words in terms of the lasting relevance of the Grenada Revolution and what it can teach us about how we need to be organizing and politicking and economicing today. As Africans in the Caribbean, but throughout the world in general. Yeah, I believe that you're more than qualified to give us our marching orders on that subject. All right. And I haven't even been able to go into neocolonialism, but I did mean to, whilst we're getting the people them, click the link. And if nobody clicks the link here, in the next 30 seconds, I'm going to just go back to the chat and read 2 questions from the chat. But I did mean to read this in relation to one of the questions that was asked earlier, in terms of not question, sorry, one question I asked earlier in terms of foreign investment. And just to clarify, just some Pan-African political theory for you, taken from the book Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, as written by the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. He says, the struggle against neocolonialism is not aimed at excluding the capital of the developed world from operating in less developed countries. It is aimed at preventing the financial power of the developed countries being used in such a way as to impoverish the less developed. Yeah. And so that's a very important point. All right. When you know what I'm saying? As Elder Kwabena was saying, like, you know, they might get the money from anywhere. But the point is this being used to further exploit and impoverish the people or to develop the people? That is the essential characteristic there. Go ahead, Elder Cecil.
May I make a point about investment? Because I think our brother Walter Rodney had a crucially important insight on that. Everybody welcomes investment. And so we have to look at the terms on which it is made. And in relation to our parts of the world, foreign direct capital investment is nothing but the mechanism by which resources that we own get transferred to others for nothing. 100%. Because what is alleged to be the capital that is exchanged for the resource they take control of happens to be paid off by amortization, by taxation and other tricks that lead to that money being paid back to the investor within sometimes less than 5 years or 3 years. And sometimes it gets worse. If you look at what's happening with oil investment in Guyana, the investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese to the investor. The investment is actually being directly paid for by the Guyanese out of the resources that are being extracted. So
Yes.
we as Africans need to spend some time understanding what Walter Rodney and the other people, including Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, theorize about the nature of foreign direct capital investment. It is not a good thing in and of itself.
Yes, I agree. Greetings. I'm coming to you, Brother Kwame. Now we have one guest. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna take Set Imhotep, and then I'm gonna take one question from the chat, and then we're gonna wrap up here. And so go ahead, Brother Kwame. Now then we're gonna take Set Imhotep, and then we're gonna come through.
The lessons given by Kwame Nkrumah were well understood by the leadership of the revolution.
Yes,
if I can remember the quote given by Maurice Bishop, which is, for several years, if not hundreds of years, we have produced cocoa. Yet we can't process it. It is not in our control. We can sell it only to Britain. And what do we get in return? A measly amount for our cocoa and tins of Milo. We have no control. Likewise, Grenada is the second, I think, producer of nutmegs. You may not know this. Very, very important nutmegs are.
I thought it was the number one as far as the Caribbean is concerned. But yeah, go ahead.
No, Indonesia is the number one.
Okay.
I've been to the warehouses where even now the nutmegs are collected from small farmers and accumulated.
Yes.
Even now, we have no research as to what nutmeg could do. We don't know what its composition is. We don't know what it's used for. All we know is that we boast our nutmegs are the best, better than those Indonesian nutmegs.
Spice Island, you know?
Foolishness. During the revolution, we attempted to develop the spice and nutmeg sector and purchase equipment that would process nutmeg. And we would set up an institute to look at developing spice. And of course, the invasion occurred, the collapse of the revolution occurred, and so on. So, yes, we would take money. But we would
sorry, my brother. Just to clarify what you're saying there, are you saying that that Grenada is no longer processing its spices in the way that it was doing during the revolution? Is that what you are saying?
No. It never processed its spices during the revolution. It was on the cusp, because I was in in London when we were setting out the specifications for getting a mill to mill the nutmeg. And alongside of that, we would, in an institute in Grenada, establish learning facilities to understand what it is that nutmeg could do. But the old slavery days of producing nutmegs still there during the revolution and still there now, which is small farmers catch their backside picking this nutmeg, tending the trees, and occasionally bringing it in sacks, in burlap sacks, to a depot.
Yes.
And
all right.
It's then sold off. We don't know what for. We don't know where.
I'm gonna ask for a liberty, Elder Cecil. Yeah, we had two people in the chat. Good night, my son. But one other has just joined us, and I'm gonna cut it off here. All right, and I'm only gonna allow it because our brother is actually from Grenada and in Grenada. He joined us last week, and I did ask him to come through. All right, so I humbly ask for the extension of one, Elder Cecil, if you don't mind. All right, thank you very much. All right, so I'm gonna pardon me.
You know I'm easygoing.
Good tax. All right, so we've got three. Nobody else click the link, please. Nobody else click the link. I'm gonna take questions and comments from these three, and then we're going to wrap up. Okay. So unfortunately, I won't be able to read any more comments in the chat, although some of them are important, but we'll get to them another time. This won't be our only opportunity to discuss these issues, brothers and sisters. So do stay tuned. But with that, let me introduce Brother Imhotep with thank yous, because he was able to connect me with the National Joint Action Committee, NJAC, although they weren't able to actually join, although they tried very hard. But we're going to bring them on. I've been speaking to Brother Kwesi, who is, and he's agreed that we're going to come on and just do a session about Trinidad and the Black Power Revolution in Trinidad. So do stay tuned for that. But Imhotep.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that new news is just dropped there that the brother will be coming onto the panel to share some history about Trinidad. But let me don't forget my manners. Peace and Pan-African power to the panel and to the audience. Firstly, I wanted to express all right, so you guys can't see me, but I'm 31 years old. I'm a youth in this Pan-African thing. I'm a youth generally, right? I have to express my appreciation for the two gentlemen that are still with us and for the entirety of the panel for coming on and sharing the testimony and the information about the Grenadian Revolution. Because, well, some members in the audience will know this about me, but I grew up very privileged in Trinidad and Tobago. I went to a private primary school. I went to one of the so-called prestige schools in Trinidad and Tobago that was literally built for the children of the planters. And I never learned anything about any of this in any of my social studies, any of the historical syllabus that they brought to us. So I really, really genuinely appreciate you guys taking the time to give your testimony today. Because I'm so uninformed or maybe underinformed about the revolution, I would shy away from asking questions about it today, just because I would want to bank some more information about it. But I did want to get the panel's perspective, if they have any, on the 1970 insurrection in Trinidad and Tobago. Like what caused it, and also what were its causes? Sorry, what were its effects after the fact, if any?
Beautiful question. Any of our panelists have a perspective on 1970 Trinidad uprising?
I give up on that. I will lumber.
We know LSS have the things in us. So go on through LSS.
No, importantly, 1970 is the end of the 60s, and the 60s is the decade of Black Power. So, and it's Black worldwide, African worldwide, if you will. It's at the end of a decade where African Americans have been dancing in the street. That's what the song says. But in fact, they've been doing the revolution in the street. And in the Caribbean, what we had was more than a decade in places like Jamaica of really backward neocolonialism. And it was the moment of slow boiling process, which in fact exploded in Trinidad in 1970. And in a way, 2 years later, manifested in the overwhelming election of Michael Manley, who tapped into all of that Rastafari and Black African energy and so on. Now, the NJAC, who we didn't hear from earlier on, were a big part of that moment in Trinidad. And like I said during the program, it got to the extent of a set of young people being willing to take up arms against the government of Eric Williams, who by then, even though they had oil and therefore to some extent riches, was running a really terrible neo-colony with a police chief that is reputed to have been had coke dealers in the street and so on. So it was kind of an extraordinary neo-colony. And in that moment, the place that had produced Stokely, Kwame Ture, and others exploded in this. It really was a popular upsurge of at least half the population. There are some Indians in it, but they really didn't get the message. And so even though one of the big marches marched to the Indian area in order to try to say we're in this together, it didn't happen. So it was an African upsurge against an African neocolonial government in a Caribbean territory. It was effectively defeated by a combination of police and army. the oil at crisis shortly after that raised the price of oil, and so CLR James said that, quote, Eric Williams was no genius, the oil saved him. So what happened in oil prices in the early 70s also mattered to the effective outcome of that moment. So it's complicated, but that one account of it from me.
Okay, I'll give you one follow-up in because we have to move on. Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll give you one.
If only very, very minor pushback. I have heard it said that the reason the march after Carney didn't, basically that the Indians didn't come and help in Lab until in the march that was supposed to occur after the Carney march is because Eric shut down the country with a state of emergency when he realized how big it was getting before the second march could have gone on, and such that they could have arrested some of the organizers and that kind of thing. I just wanted to know if you had heard any of those things, but also it's very, very endearing and edifying. And there's another word I want to use. I can't find it, but to hear a lot of this perspective of Eric Williams from people outside of Trinidad and Tobago, because when I'm inside of Trinidad and I talk this kind of like a crazy now, boy. So I really appreciate some of this information.
Yeah. On Eric, there's a wonderful Guyanese brother, Gordon Roller, who wrote an essay on Eric that everybody should read. It's in a book. I think the book's called, either the essay is called "Is Massa Day Dead," or the book itself is called "Massa Day Dead." But get hold of that essay by Gordon Roller and read his perspective on Eric Williams.
All right, we'll try to post a link to that book in the chat. And on the subject of Eric Williams' genius or lack thereof, he's the only man that I know that's responsible for banning his own book.
I hear so. If he actually did it, it's quite remarkable. I was never sure whether he'd actually.
Apparently, I've said it many times, and nobody seems to refute this idea.
Able to confirm.
No, he's able to deny it. So whenever I've said it, everybody seems to agree that he did this. Like within the book banning that was going on throughout the Caribbean for Black Power.
It was certainly said, and I heard it every time like this, that it was banned. But I don't know if it was officially banned.
All right,
maybe this young Imhotep can check it out. You know, was a piece of law or something passed that said capitalism and slavery, which is a perfectly innocuous book, was actually banned by Eric Williams.
No, you say that on the testament. You say that on the testament, but you say it's innocuous, but people have gone to great lengths to try and.
No. I don't mean it's empty.
Right.
It makes, in accordance with the title, an important case about the relationship between the enslavement of our ancestors and the development of the Western economy, especially the UK. James has an essay in a book called Amistad, which has the same account for how France benefited from its relationship to enslavement in the Caribbean. So I'm not saying that capitalism and slavery is not an important book. I'm saying that in the context of the politics of our region, it's difficult to see why Eric would have concluded that capitalism and slavery were dangerous to him and his region.
Okay, I understand. Well, mate, that's another subject for another time. But given Thatcher and Reagan, I can understand why, you know. But anyway, that was a later period.
Eric wrote a book called "From Columbus to Castro," you know.
Yep, and we have
that certainly must have to get banned. You know. All right. Coffee Campbell, you're up.
Yeah, man. Big up everybody on the panel and a very interesting conversation on the revolution. All right. So quickly on the question of foreign direct investment, right? It is said that of Eric Williams that he wasn't a genius but it's just the oil money they're saving. We could say the same.
I was quoting CLR.
Right, right. I mean, we can say the same thing about Bishop and Cord. You know, they weren't geniuses. It's a foreign aid. They saved them. And what I get from the panel on foreign investment, yeah, is that you guys see it as important, but as Cecil said, it has to be done on our terms. So the question is, which developing country around the world would you guys see as the model for handling foreign direct investment on their terms?
Well, I don't have any models. For me, you know, you have some European capitalist countries where the masses are catching their ass, and you have some third world places where the masses are catching their ass. In the third world, we call them neo-colonists. And I find it difficult to admire any of them or to present any of them as models of anything other than neo-colonialism. So it's not a question for me, that particular one, although I understand where you're coming from on it.
Not even China?
But China happens now to be the second most important economy in the world. It's under pressure from the racist West because it's in danger of being the most important economy and other things, geopolitically important place in the world, and the racist West is not prepared.
Yes, but why?
I think what
rising?
I think what he's asking, Cecil, is I think he's alluding to the idea that the principal reason behind China's economic rise it has to do with foreign capital investment.
Yes, yes.
I've known. Wait, I know. The brother who's asking the question well, and quite like him, right? So I understand what he's asking. I'm saying that question also is not one that I wish to address in the way that he's asking it. This question requires, and there is some truth in the rumor, that the West chose, when it was running down its manufacturing, to put manufacturing capital into China. I do not deny that. But what I'm saying about it is that both using that Western capital and using its own resources, China, outside of the ambit of international capital and the control of international capital, which is throughout at the end of the 1940s, has made itself into what it now is, which is the second most important economy in the world. And it is coming under attack by some people who are claiming that it's anti-democratic, who don't believe in democracy, the West. They underuse it. They don't believe in it.
So China through foreign direct.
Sorry, Coffee. I'll just have to finish, please, and you will get one follow-up, just like Imhotep did. Go ahead.
In addition, so the assault on China, right? The West is talking about China and the Uyghurs. They are now investing in India as an alternative to China, and the record of the Indian government in relation to Muslims in India, in relation to almost everything in India, including what a place
the masses of the people.
Kashmir.
Yeah.
Kashmir.
So they can't pretend to be interested in human rights. The US has a most amazing incarceration record. So they mustn't come to humanity as if they're committed to human rights or human freedom or human dignity. And here they are, just given nuclear weapons to Australia. This is the country that the day before yesterday voted against giving the natives that they're almost eliminated some kind of representation in their country at the Constitution.
Wicked. The people are wicked. Sorry.
These are the people who are assaulting China on the basis of an alliance with Japan. What did Japan do in China in the 30s? They caused the death of 30 million Chinese. I think it's 36 million, in fact. And the West, pretending to be human and humanitarian, is making an alliance with them against the Chinese. Please. So the issue.
Hold on, let me finish.
The issue of the place of Western interest capital in China is a subtext that people can rise up high if they want, but I'm not particularly interested in doing it.
One second, Coffee, because Kwabena wants to engage with your question as well. Go ahead, Robert Kwabena.
Oh, sure.
Okay. If by the question, I understand that the questioner is asking that there's no country that has received investment without condition. Well, I don't know, but what is certainly clear is, as we discussed earlier, the West uses their investment not for the benefit of the countries in which they have invested, but rather to suck out the resources that belong to the people of those countries. The problem for Grenada may have been is that we are relatively small, so we didn't need a huge amount of investment. A small amount of investment made a difference, but certainly the investments that we received were not with conditions, or not with conditions that were harmful to the people of Grenada or to Grenada. That is a fact. Now, the questioner alludes to the fact that using the quote that Eric Williams was lucky because the price of oil rose, and likewise Cord and Bishop were lucky because of the investment they received. No, they were not lucky. They were wise, and they put their interests, they put their hearts into the interests of the people. One of the things, two things that has never been happened to these people. One, there's no secret bank account in Switzerland. There's no secret bank account in Britain for anyone who was leading the revolution. Not one. From the highest level to the lowest comrade. No secret bank account. All of the money was spent for the people of Grenada. Secondly, the Americans, in their propaganda after the invasion, put out a poster saying, "These people have stolen your money. These people have taken your money." And the business people said to the Americans, those who supported the invasion, said to the Americans, "Don't put out that poster. No one will believe it. We know that these people didn't steal the money." Yet other countries, when they get investment, top slice goes to the leaders in those countries to collaborate in robbing their own people. I can't speak about which countries do not have conditions attached to the investment that they have. But what I can say is that in Grenada, we managed to do that trick. And maybe that was one of the things that led to the falling of the revolution. But, you know.
Well, I will add this very quickly before I give Coffee his one follow-up, is that he's gotten this information from a snippet that I played from Bernard Cord last week, where he was detailing this and how they went to Europe and so on and so forth, and how the European Union was very happy with them because they were balancing the books and they spent the money well and so on and so forth. One of the things that relates to what you just said, Brother Kwabena, and that Bernard Cord also said that Brother Coffee is not rigging up, was the extent to which they attacked corruption in the country. Yeah, so when you speak about them never have no Swiss bank account, Bernard Cord said when any quote unquote developing nation that is able to have a substantial impact upon corruption frees up millions and probably billions in resources, yeah, because a much of the impoverishment of majority black nations and quote unquote developing nations is eaten up because the neo-colonial process is maintained by a certain level of corruption in the political class, yeah. So if you are able to get rid of that, there is a significant amount of resources that you free up. He also said, I'm going to come back to you. He also said that every time that the GDP or and I think you use some other indicator as listed was always much more if you measured it in terms of the voluntary work that was engaged, yes, by the people on the ground, yeah, because people offered their services, yeah, to build back schools in the local community or build back community centers or wherever else it was, yeah. And so when you look at it in just blanket number terms, that the what's the word? The books don't account for that, Yeah. So effectively, in real resources, oftentimes there was much more at the disposal of the government than was necessarily able to be documented in specific terms. Yeah. Go ahead, Brother Kwabena.
Talking about corruption, I don't know what happened with the previous government, but I can give you my own example. I was asked by the Ministry of Agriculture to source a particular type of fertilizer from for Grenada, for small farmers and for large farmers. And eventually I found a company that was substantially cheaper in Holland. I arranged for payment and they discussed the size of the bags or the sacks. And when the thing was finished, we paid them, but I received a call from the company about a week later, and they said, "Where do you want your commission to be paid?" Now, it wasn't as if they were surreptitious, saying, "Look, it was, where do you want your commission to be paid?" It was a completely normal transaction. Now, I'm not naive, and I was expecting that there's all sorts of skullduggery. What surprised me was the manner in which it was said. So I said, well, why don't you take the £80,000, and we're talking about 40 years ago. 40 years ago, maybe I should have taken a top slice from the £80,000. We were living, both myself and another comrade were living in council flats whilst working with the government of Grenada. I said, take it off the amount that you have charged the government and people of Grenada. The young woman was sort of puzzled, befuddled. So you have in all of these transactions the prospect of corruption, where you will be corrupted by the people who are investing in your country.
Powerful point.
Corrupting you. And
Powerful
so it's quite easy. If you're a poor civil servant, it doesn't make enough money, you do a deal, and there it is, that money. And then, of course, you're more susceptible to corruption because you've broken through the barrier, and you're more victims of the possibility of force.
Yes, sir.
It's quite normal. And Claude is quite right, which is we got rid of corruption. Well, we didn't get rid of corruption. We reduced corruption.
Significantly. Coffee, you got one follow-up. Go ahead.
Yeah, of course, if you get rid of corruption or significantly lower the levels of corruption, you can free up a lot of resources to do. But the point is to fund the ambitious spending programs that was going on at the time. Grenada was a poor country, and you would have to have had outside, whether loans or grants from the EU or the Soviet bloc. You can't fund that those kind of programs, ambitious social spending programs, with just taxing the rich. Even America is finding it now that the type of programs that Biden and AOC and all those socialists want to implement, you can't do that with just taxing the rich. You can have to eventually tax the middle class or print more money. So the point I'm making is that, getting rid of corruption is vital. The kind of resources needed, we're not going to do that. But I don't get that answer. Well, I kind of get the answer that you don't think that foreign direct investment is needed because it always comes with conditions. But when government give you things for free, that comes with conditions also. I mean, ShakaRa was just interviewing somebody about the NHS and so forth, right? Anything that government give you for free, it can come with conditions. But the question is it better to have a more decentralized system where people can choose from different investors, or everything monopolized in government? Because I can't say, all right, you don't want China, and only think the Asian countries are special or whatever, it don't apply to Africa. But recently you have Bangladesh, you have Vietnam, you have Sri Lanka. Well, Sri Lanka mess up with the modern monetary theory, but you have these other countries that taking the baton from China. A lot of the cheap labor now is investments are moving to those countries because the wages in China is now rising, and that's how capitalism works, right? You have to get on that first rung, that first ladder to climb up. But if we're going to recheck all these empirical cases of countries lifting themselves out of the poverty trap, right? But you go and use Ghana, and then Nkrumah, Grenada, Cuba, Guinea-Bissau, and Cabral. I mean, why are you going to offer black people these models that empirically hasn't worked when you have models even in Africa of investment, both domestic and foreign investment, that actually work?
Thank you very much, Coffee. Much appreciated. Any responses to that?
No, not really.
Just a quick one. You alluded, and it's in Bernard Cord's book. For every dollar we got in investment, we got $1 of labor in Grenada. So if we got $1 million for a particular project, providing we can get people supportive of the revolution to carry out that project, we got $2 million, and Grenada was small enough to be able to do that. Tax or lending, yes, everything has to be paid for. You could pay tax or lend. I don't think we taxed significantly the business sector
people
in Grenada. What would have happened when the revolution really got steam and we really had modernized and so on? I don't know.
No, yeah. These are good questions. These are good questions. Yeah. I will say, however, that the while as people measure like China and so, you know, they might say Britain, America, so on and so forth, there's a very poor record, around like most of Europe, most of South and Central America, Asia, in relation to these issues of foreign investment and the impact that it has on the poverty of the masses of the people. Yeah, if you look at places like Greece, for example, and so on and so forth, yeah, it's a madness. So the fairy tale of the success of capitalism and neoliberalism in general, in particular, is grossly over exaggerated. Yeah, but that's another subject for another time. All right, let us go on to our last questioner, who is in Grenada. Oh, Brother Kwame, I've just seen you. Unfortunately, I cannot take you. Yeah, we do need to wrap up, Brother Kwame. So do join us on another stage. Yeah, but I did make an announcement for nobody else to join the panel. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to stick to that particular declaration, Brother Kwame. So I apologize. All right, but Brother Dev, blessings.
Blessings, everybody.
Blessings.
Hey, look at the Kingsman. That's good. There was some very informative information coming out from those brothers.
Greetings.
And as a Grenadian, lived throughout the revolution. I was young then. And when you look at the revolution, many different people in Grenada would have different perspective on it. Depends on who telling their story. Because everybody didn't have the same story. It didn't impact everybody the same way. But from my experience, I think that was the best time we ever had. And I don't think nothing can compare to it even today. Some people might be, say differently. But what I've seen while growing up there is that the lower class people was unified. When time, I said it last week, when time coming together to build a country, to build your community, no one is depending on who paying me. Everybody just come out and put a hand. So I'm saying this to say that we are living in a time now whereby I don't know why some of these politicians nowadays don't take a few pages out of the revolution and implement it into their structures. They depend more on tourism, and they have literally killed agriculture, literally. And that's what the revolution was about, agriculture eat what you grow and grow what you eat. And we had a lot of factories back then. So you see, there were lots of factories back, and we used to go to school with our nectar. As Sister Valerie said, the CPE class, you know, old and young, is a part of it learning to read and write. You know, so I am saying this to say that the revolution and the invasion it is a bittersweet, but I'm more looking on the sweet side.
No, I hear you, my brother. I hear you.
On the sweet side,
I hear you.
Is then because they came and they changed everything. It's like since after the invasion, they tried to get rid of everything that represent revolution. Everything. You know, Keith Mitchell sold out the machine, you know, and all these type of things.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, I am grateful to hear these, you know, those brothers sharing some things that some of them I didn't even know.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
As I said, where you grew up, you will tell a different story based on your environment and what you experience. You know, so I'm happy to be edified by those brothers, man. I thank you deeply.
Much appreciated, brother Dev, and I do thank you. You joined us last week, and you did say you were going to come through, and I appreciate your presence, especially because you are in Grenada. So we thank you for that, and I think we'll close the comments on that word right there. So give thanks, yeah. Give thanks, brother Dev. No doubt we're going to come back to the subject, so please stay tuned to Got Kush TV, brother Dev. Okay.
Okay.
Give thanks. All right. Elder Cecil, Brother Kwabena, we're going to close out now. Brother Kwabena, I'm going to give you opportunity to just let people know how they can get in contact with you, especially in relation to the campaigns and so on and so forth. Let people know how they can get in contact with you.
Okay. Firstly, I would just like to thank Brother Dev for putting it in the way that he did. There was not 100% unanimity in Grenada around the revolution. Yeah. Although surprisingly, as I think you have illustrated in our discussion, a huge number of people who were supportive of Gary were extremely supportive of the revolution because it had a direct impact upon their children and upon themselves. Very, very supportive. The greatest achievement of the Revo, however, was the huge self-confidence that it instilled in Grenadians and in Caribbean people. You will know that one of the greatest benefits of having a so-called private education in Britain is not what you learn about Latin or whatever, but the self-belief that it imbues in people who have gone through that process. I went through comprehensive education here, and I didn't have that kind of chutzpah that these people have. Yet, in Grenada, you had almost the yes, we can spirit. Anything. You go to Grenada and people say, well, we can do that. It's just we have to learn how to do it, but we can do it. Whereas throughout the Caribbean, and I've traveled to Jamaica, I've traveled to Trinidad and so on, it's, well, we don't know if we can do it. We need to bring in an expert and so on, and all of that stuff. Just to say thanks to God Kush TV for this opportunity.
No problem.
And thanks to Brother Cecil for giving guidance to me now and many, many, many years ago. You will not necessarily be aware of how instrumental you were from turning callow youth into a less callow pensioner. So, in relation to the stories about the revolution, it's on our website, Grenada for Whatever. I won't try and give you, well, I'll try and give you the address. It's Grenada-forwhatever.net. But just search Grenada for Whatever and you'll find it. And we've got history of the revolution things that are happening now, analysis of some of the things happening in Grenada, such as citizenship by investment and all of that stuff. And again, join us in the campaign. And thank you very much, ShakaRa, for the invite today.
The honor is mine, my brother. The honor is mine. It's been a beautiful session. I just wanted to add before we get a close word from Elder Cecil that brother Dev mentioned Keith Mitchell. Yeah, and I learned recently that when Maurice Bishop was speaking in New York at Hunter College, that famous speech, that Keith Mitchell, yeah, who would become the future what's it called, Prime Minister of Grenada, was outside that particular speech at Hunter College leading a demonstration, an anti-bishop demonstration, yeah. And he was the last but one. So the prime minister before the current prime minister was Keith Mitchell, yeah. And apparently the CIA had identified him from then to be a possible replacement, yeah, for the revolutionary government, apparently. Okay, so
I understand that he was a member of the Jewel or New Jewel movement before he left. I'm not sure of that, but
okay,
that's
I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
Betrayers quite frequently have a place in the in the movement at some level.
Yes.
Indeed.
The man who killed Sankara was a long time friend.
True. Reggie, they brought together. Yeah, true.
Yes.
Elder Cecil, in your closing words, just give a contextualize for our viewers what the Grenada Revolution teaches us and why is it relevant in our battle against neocolonialism today, particularly in the Caribbean, but throughout the African world as always.
Yes. I regret to say that my view is, right, let me start somewhere else.
Go ahead, Elder. Go ahead.
Part of Karl Marx's revolution was intellectual. And he said that the proof of theory is in practice. Right?
Yes.
And so our current problems aren't theoretical. They're actually practical. What 100. We do in the world in which we live that appears to be so wickedly dominated by a genuinely terrible enemy that has the means to pretend to be decent and democratic and people-oriented, which is the achievement of capitalism. Now, that's a practical challenge we face, and the Grenada Revolution was an important attempt by an organized leadership to take a people down the necessary road, which is a path away from imperialism, a part of African self-consciousness, a part of organized self-help, self-liberation. Now, that came to a desperate and still impacting terrible end. So it's another part of the problem that we face. But what us as Africans and as poor people, as exploited people have to do is to find a way not to go with our brother Kofi and say that capitalism is the answer when clearly it isn't, when everything about it shows that what is happening, as Marx predicted, is that more and more of the resources get concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. And there are some elements of stupidity about how they conduct themselves. The last two crises, especially the one in 2007, 2028, was capitalism at its most idiotic. Finance capital just mismanaging its resources, misanalyzing what was involved in, and we have paid the subsequent price. And so I see our condition as the same condition that the Grenadian people were trying to solve. It means that we don't have any easy answers, but the one answer that we shouldn't opt for is the one which says that capitalism is the only solution, because actually capitalism is the only enemy, and winning against that enemy is a challenge that we face.
Thank you very much, Elder Cecil. There's so much I meant to come back to the point. Somebody mentioned Marischal and Garvey
I did.
Yeah, I know. But I meant to come back to that point earlier. And we're not gonna have time for it today. But just to look at the influence of those two.
Make a point, because I don't have to.
No. It wasn't a point. It was just to emphasize the impact of those two men on the revolution. Like I'm not mistaken in saying that the revolution made the Garvey's birthday a holiday at some point, or they celebrated Garvey quite significantly. There's a number of speeches. They had a Garvey Day in Nobody's Backyard. There's a speeches of the government where they're speaking at a Garvey Day celebration in Grenada and so on. So
that I didn't remember, but it's important. Marischal was a Garveyite, a very serious one, a man who believed in the Caribbean Federation, a man who believed in liberation of the Caribbean and Grenadian people, and was a significant figure for the Grenada Revolution, and is still a significant figure for the Grenadian people. Yes.
It's just a point I meant to come back to it earlier. So I want to highlight those great men. Yeah, brothers and sisters, I'm going to do something for you all as well. I'm going to share some literature in the chat. Some of it has been mentioned today, but in the comment section, I'll post some literature that people can follow up and read on the Grenada Revolution. And we're going to close out today's session with the words and the voice of Maurice Bishop. Yes, so do stay tuned as we close out this particular session. I want you to encourage you to tune in next week. So for the next 2 weeks, the same slot at 8 p.m. On an Najima Day or Tuesday, we are going to be dealing with the current situation in West Africa as it relates to Guinea, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Yeah, and on the first session for both sessions we're gonna be joined by our sister Kushti. On the first, she's gonna be delivering a presentation, and on the second, she's gonna help me co-host a panel on said subject matter. Yeah, so do stay tuned in for that. That's gonna be the next 2 weeks. Yeah, at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. I want to thank Elder Cecil, Brother Kwabena, Brother Omowale, Brother Opoku, Brother Dennis from Barbados, who was unable to get on, and Brother Opoku, yes, from Trinidad, who was unable to get on, and of course, Auntie Valerie, for joining us for this particular conversation. I'm sure brothers and sisters have got a lot from it. If you got something from this conversation, if you learned a lot from the conversation, please type a 1 in the chat right about now. Just give me 1s in the chat for everybody who loved the conversation, learned from it, and gained a lot from the conversation. Just show your love to our guests for that reason. I am entirely inspired by the lessons that the Grenada Revolution teaches us, particularly in terms of its attempts at developing new structures of government and economy. Yes, they were very, very creative in terms of how they tried to organize and develop a new structure, and through that new structure to develop a new constitution. And it's that kind of creativity, as Elder Cecil says, the answers to these questions are not easy, but where the answers will be found is going to be in our creative application towards solving the problems that we're trying to solve. And I think that is the greatest lesson that the Grenada Revolution certainly teaches us, brothers and sisters. And so with that, as I said, we're going to close with the word sounds of Baba Maurice Bishop. I'm going to let our guests depart when they're ready. They can still feel free to stay to hear the words of Maurice Bishop as well as we close the show. Or we say, Tenda Mwali, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Muzimo Mokolo, give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodi, African power and African liberation for all African people. We're going to play 2 snippets of Maurice Bishop. One was during a Africa Liberation Day observance in Grenada, at which Samora Machel of Mozambique was present. And then after that, we're going to play a video of Maurice Bishop speaking in New York. And so we close the show with that, brothers and sisters. I thank you all once again for tuning in. We'll be back next week. Tenda Mwari.
We celebrate African Liberation Day in Grenada to be conscious of the extent to which this enemy that we call imperialism is the same enemy for Grenada as it is for Africa. It is important for us to try to reflect on how deep that link is. for us to understand that the same banks that try to exploit us in the Caribbean are the same banks that are exploiting our sisters and brothers in Africa. That the same big oil companies that are exploiting us in the Caribbean are the same big oil companies that are exploiting our sisters and brothers in Africa. That the same threats that Reagan and Haig use against us in the Caribbean, it is the same threats that they use against our sisters and brothers in Africa. That when they cut off their food agreement in Mozambique, so that our sisters and brothers in Mozambique will start to starve, they also cut off their wheat agreement in Nicaragua in the hope that the people of Nicaragua would also starve. That when they try to block economic projects for Angola and Mozambique and Ethiopia and Zimbabwe and other countries on the African continent, they also try to block such projects right here in the Caribbean. They use their CIA, they use their IMF, they use their international lending agencies to try to see in what ways they can also block the economic development of our sisters and brothers in Africa. Black people ain't supposed to rise up. They ain't supposed to have no rights. And the poor and the oppressed of the world generally, those people who are fighting for their liberation, those people who are not willing to roll over and be stepped upon, they don't have no rights. For them is the roller, is the big stick. That is the way in which they operate. And we are not supposed to fight back. These people, comrades, are also going to have to understand that whenever we have to make a choice between rolling over and kneeling down and bending over and bawling, yes, master, kick me, please, and standing up, we will always choose to stand up.
The real reason for all of this hostility is because some perceive that what is happening in Grenada can lead to a new socio-economic and political path of development. They give all kinds of reasons and excuses, some of them credible, some utter rubbish. There's an interesting one that we saw very recently in a secret report of the State Department. I want to tell you about that one, so you can reflect on that one. That secret report made this point, that Grenada is different to Cuba and Nicaragua, and the Grenada Revolution is in one sense even worse, I'm using their language, than the Cuban and Nicaraguan revolutions, because the people of Grenada and the leadership of Grenada speaks English and therefore can communicate directly to the people of the United States. I can see from your applause, sisters and brothers, that you agree with the report. But I want to tell you what that same report also said, and said that also made us very dangerous. And that is that the people of Grenada and the leadership of Grenada are predominantly black. They said that 95% of our population is black, and they had a correct statistic. And if we have 95% of predominantly African origin in our country, then we can have a dangerous appeal to 30 million black people in the United States. Now, that aspect of the report clearly is one of the most sensible ones.